All right, so I did say that I wanted to talk about the history of Jihad, right? Especially the history before even the First Crusade, right? Because all the people who I keep saying, trying to cope and see, that's like, oh yeah, no, this is all new developments. It's like, no, it's not, right? Anyone who says that these are new developments doesn't even know how we got a navy in the United States, right? It's literally because the fucking, quote unquote Islamists, right? Let's be fair, it's just Muslims, wouldn't stop touching our fucking boats, right? Because according to their own testimony, again, their religion permits them to accost, enslave, and take from the kafir, what they will. So again, like, we're gonna watch one video and then I'm gonna read 2 articles. It's a part 1 and a part 2. And so if you're a copyright holder to any of this stuff, just let me know if you want to take this down, right? Don't copyright strike me. Just tell me that to take something down and I'll take it down, right? So now that I've presumably said something to help not get assassinated by the copyright ninjas, right? Let us proceed. So this is going to be Islamic atrocities that triggered the First Crusade, and then we're going to go into a detailed history about the first, the events leading up to the First Crusade. What I tell you about touching the boats. Oh, that's a nice Kirsche gun. Holy shit. Fairs over fatwas, right? Are we getting a fatwa today? Probably not, but I will probably be the first. If I am not the first VTuber to get a fatwa, I am doing something wrong, right?
No, it doesn't say there's nothing to back it up. It says, in actuality, Muslims have never done this.
Can you?
Again, this is so absurdly stupid of a take that the person who says this is either lying to your face or has no idea what they're talking about, right? And we will see this because, again, I have 2 articles to read after this.
Read the exact quote again of what they say.
The quote is, okay. Alexius I, quote, said, and again in his letter to Pope Urban, Alexius I, quote, said that the Muslims were desecrating Christian shrines in the Holy Land and molesting Christian pilgrims. In actuality, the Muslims had never threatened the shrines or cut off Christian access to them. Well, I guess, hey, they didn't threaten them. They just destroyed them.
Yeah, it's true again.
It's true.
It's an interesting way for someone to play the weasel word game, right? It's like, yes, we it's like, yes, we didn't really accost you, we just killed you, right? It's like, what is this? Vid could come up a bit. Okay, it says it's peaking on my side. If I turn my, hold on. I'm gonna try turning it up just a bit. Let me know if it does anything, because I just turned it up all the way on this end.
A little Telrega. All right. Do you want me to elaborate on this, or would you like to? Because this one needs some serious unpacking.
No, lay on, McDuff.
Okay. So they're saying that Alexius basically said, oh, these Muslims are doing bad things. And but the text wants us to know, no, that was a lie. They weren't doing anything. So basically, Alexius was a warmonger and a liar who artificially created a pretext to go and,
thank you for letting me know about that, Kennock,
launch a First Crusade, because he obviously played an instrumental role. Meanwhile, in reality, we have copious documentation, primary sources from eyewitnesses of
from the Muslim accounts themselves. Again, all you have to do is actually read the hadith, which aren't that hard to get your hands on anymore. So there's not really an excuse anymore other than you just don't want to do the reading, which, I mean, to be fair, it is a very repetitive set of reading. So I could understand why someone might not want to expend the time for this. But again,
what Muslims were actually doing to Christians. And this is one of the most horrific times. This is the rise of the Seljuk Turks, who are now running.
Yeah, denying the things that we have documented for the Seljuk Turks is on par with genocide denial, in my opinion. It is that fucking ridiculous to just try to say, oh yeah, no, this never actually happened, right? It's like, yes, you mean like how the Ottomans didn't march Armenians into the sea, right? That totally didn't fucking happen, right? It was just Armenians just disappeared into the ether. They kind of do that, right? So too did again the Syrians and the fucking Greeks, right? Yeah, just in the middle of the Ottoman reign, they just like disappeared into the ether, right? Just like that one ice cream sandwich meme, joke, right? It's just like it just like into nothing, right? If only I could make a perfectly cut scream with my fucking like actual voice, but you know it's not humanly possible. That's kind of the joke. But yeah, no, denying the atrocities of Islam is, in my opinion, on par with like Holocaust denial and like non-king denial. It's just fucking ridiculous and absurd, to be perfectly honest, right? It's like, yeah, nah, this happened. Go fuck yourself. Like, this is not really a question of like, did this happen? We have the historical documentation for it.
Amok in Asia Minor, right? You know, which was much of it was Byzantine land, and you know, I wrote an article. It came out on April 24th about the Armenian genocide. That's Armenian Genocide Remembrance Day, and so this is all.
Which, by the way, Turkey still won't really recognize as actually having happened, right? It's okay to deny some genocides, just not the genocides we want, right? It's literally the position of the fucking these idiots, right? It's like, yes, you can't deny that, and you shouldn't, by the way, deny that like the Holocaust happened. Holocaust denial is, in my opinion, really fucking stupid too. But like, I don't really see a substantive difference between the Holocaust denial and Armenian genocide denial, right? Good evening. I'm not too late, am I? No, you're actually basically right on time. I had a hard time getting the stream up because OBS needed to be completely uninstalled, reinstalled, and then I had to finagle with it after that. So,
fresh in my head because my argument is actually the Armenian genocide didn't start in 1915.
Oh yeah, and a lot of those people who complain about that will also deny that the Holodomor, right? They'll deny the Holodomor was a genocide. It's like, nah, I'm pretty sure the reason that, you know, the reason why there was a bit of a debate in how to define genocide, according, you know, in the United Nations, was because, again, one of the member states on the Security Council, you know, who actually helps to define these terms, and therefore, because they're a member of the Security Council, all they need is one person to veto the ruling. Pretty sure one of those people was actually involved in an active genocide at the time, right? The murder of millions of Ukrainians by starvation, right? Yeah, but you know, communists can't really be held accountable for their actions, right? Let's see. They just don't want to be productive, only take from others like raiders. I mean, yes, actually, unironically, right? That's the whole point of the jizya, right? We shouldn't have to work. They should supply us, right?
In 16, as we're told. Now, it actually started over 1,000 years ago in 1019, because that's when, and I quoted from contemporary and near contemporary sources, Armenians, especially like Matthew of Edessa, who talk about the rise of the Seljuk Turks and what they did in Asia Minor, which included killing tens, if not hundreds of thousands over decades, from like 1019 up until up until near the First Crusade. Tens of thousands of Armenians and Georgians and Greeks burning literally thousands of churches, turning entire Christian cities into wastelands, plundering them. And within all this also was the traditional Islamic.
I mean, there used to be a substantially larger population of Christians in Gaza. I wonder what happened to them. Right, just putting that out there, right? I wonder what happened to the Christian populations in Gaza. Do they still exist? Yeah, but all you have to do is pay attention. It's like, I wonder what church attendance has been like over over the decades. Interesting.
Hostility for Christian symbols, the destruction of crosses, destruction of icons, Christian statues, decapitating the statues, gouging their eyes out.
Yeah, because they're iconoclasts.
And I only tell you that so you understand this isn't just some barbarian pagan conquerors. They are, but they also had an ideological component fueling their animus, which is.
Okay, so I'm going to point out that like when he calls them pagan conquerors, I'm pretty sure this guy is on the Hubal Allah theory, which is the theory that Allah is actually just a quote-unquote monotheism. You can't see the quotation marks I'm using right now, but quotation marks here. A monotheistic reinterpretation of Hubal as Yahweh, right? But that's a very contentious position. There's, I think, good arguments for and against it. It really does depend on where your starting position is in the analysis, right? Let's see. I heard it said the Turks pushed the native Greek populace out of Anatolia, as I think Anatolia once hosted Ionian Greek colonies. Yes, they did. They did once host Ionian Greek colonies. And yes, even in the modern times, right? Even in the modern times, the Muslim rulers very rarely treated the Christian and like Jewish dhimmis very well. But I mean, occasionally some rulers were better than others, right? It's not like there's a uniformity of history. But I mean, there was the Pontic genocide, which was the actual unironic genocide of Greeks by the the Ottomans. So there's that. Anime is over animus. Evil is evil. Yeah. But some evils are more depraved than others, right? But the Pontic genocide, so the genocide of the Greeks, happened around the same time as the genocide of the Armenians and the Assyrians. So really terrible time. That was all in World War I, though.
Again, important to keep in mind. But so they do all that, and then they also conquer Jerusalem from the Fatimids, who, as we just mentioned, what they did.
Yep.
And during this time, they really engage in some of the most graphic abuses, which I touched on, about what they were doing to the patriarch, completely beating him up, mocking him, trying to extort all the money they could, throwing him in jail until Christians would raise money. Then they'd take him out and throw him back in for more money.
Yeah, because again, they don't see you as an equal being, right? Like, I've literally quoted the Quran on stream, specifically the teaching about how Christians and Jews and the polytheists, mushrikun, right, i.e., those who commit shirk, are the worst of creatures. They're like, of all of creation, they are the worst, right? It's like, interesting. I wonder what kind of disposition this breeds in a person, right?
Raping women, enslaving people. And
now, when they say women, you have to remember that the definition we're using here is not our definition of women. I mean, just look at how old Aisha was, right? It wasn't just women. Speaking of which, I find it odd, Anna Kasparian, an Armenian, is on a show called The Young Turks, a show named after the same charlatans that tried to purge Armenians during and after World War I. Yeah, and you know what? They've addressed that issue they've literally addressed that on the show, where it's like, where I think Cenk Uygur was like, well, it just sounds like a good revolutionary youth movement, right? It's like, I don't want one faction to ruin the name, to keep us from using a good workable name, right? It's like, interesting. So, let's just say there was a right wing news agency in Germany, and they called themselves the Young Germans. I don't know, even though that wasn't actually a genocidal organization like the Young Turks were, I don't imagine that would fly very well, right? I don't imagine being like I don't imagine like someone like, again, even if they were like, oh, I disavow everything the Nazis did, but their fit was fucking rad, and we're gonna use the fit and imagery in order to actually push a different cause, right? I imagine that would go over very well, right? So I found it a very weak argument that he had. And they know about this, and they still choose to use it. Hello, Beartarian. Hello, Gleeman. Mushroomkun. It's a mushrikun. It basically means those who commit shirk or associating partners with Allah. And that's one of the criticisms of Christianity and Islam, is that Christianity, because it's not Tawhid or Unitarianism, right? So there's not like only one person in God, in the divine being. Because it is a Trinitarian system, therefore partners are being associated with Allah. But then again, the Islamic understanding of Christianity is that Christianity apparently teaches that there is a Father, Son, and Mary for some fucking reason. It's bizarre. Muhammad did not understand anything about Christian Trinitarian theology, and it shows. Let's see. Didn't East Germany do that somewhat? That's a good question, actually. I have no idea. I'm not a big fan of German philosophy and history, so it's like, that might have been a bad example of my part, right?
And European pilgrims would go there. They would travel thousands of miles on foot And when they get there, they wouldn't even be allowed entrance until they pay. And sometimes they pay every last penny they have, and they'd still kick them out. And people would die during the voyage. And one of the most notable instances, which is well recorded, is this German pilgrimage in 1064, which they all got attacked and killed. A pilgrimage to Jerusalem. They all got attacked and killed by the Muslims, the Turks. And it talks about one beautiful nun and how everyone warned her, don't go, but she was very devout and she wanted to go worship in the holy sites. And it literally says she was gang raped to death. And then it says, and these shameless men did these sorts of things to Christians very frequently, very often. I have it all cited in
I mean, yeah. Yeah. So fun fact. Here's a fun fact about Islam, right? There is a ruling about what to do with slaves who are married. Well, not slaves, but prisoners of war, which, I mean, they're going to be enslaved anyway, right? But prisoners of war who are married. And Muhammad was very clear that prisoners of war, women captured in wartime, their marriages are automatically annulled. Therefore, doing that to them is not actually adultery. Again, like, I'm going to set up the thing. I'm going to try to get an AI to actually read the chapter so I can pause and like do commentary on it like a regular video, right? But I do want to do a reading of the Quran, not in chapter order, because in chapter order it's achronological, right? But instead read it chronologically, because I think that'll be really enlightening if we have a series where we read not instead of like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but here's the first chapter chronologically, the second chapter chronologically, and see how it moves from, oh yeah, I'm just teaching peace and love and monotheism, to it is time for war, right? To all of the violent verses that people are aware of. Yeah, those come later. They abrogate the peaceful ones. So I do think I'm gonna commit to that. It's just I need to set that up. Let's see. Help us, Vlad. You and your forest are our only hope. Hello, Kura. Because there is no peace to be had with Muslims. Hello, Cosby. There really isn't, because the thing is like if you want Muslims to be more devout, they have to go back to because like the whole point of the Protestant Reformation, right, was allegedly, right. So I'm assuming the best for like the Protestant reformers is that they thought that there were innovations and novelties in the faith that didn't belong in the faith, right? So their idea was, all right, we will look back to the scriptures as a primary source and church history as a secondary source, church tradition as a secondary source, because it turns out Calvin and Luther and most of the Protestant reformers actually did care about church tradition too, right? And they're like, all right, let's try to recreate not recreate, but restore Christianity to an older and purer form, right? So it wasn't about recreating the faith, which is the restorationist movement, right? The reformers were doing exactly what the name says. They were trying to, and emphasis on the word trying, right? I'm not making any sort of commitment here. So if you're Catholic or you're Protestant, get off my back about this, right? I'm just trying to tell you what they were trying to do. They were trying to restore the church to a previous purer state without implying that there was a break in continuity, right? This is actually why the restorationists who believe in the great apostasy actually call Protestants oftentimes apostate Catholics, because turns out Calvinists, Lutherans, Methodists, all of those groups, they believe themselves to be the actual Catholic faith, right? And they believe, so it's like so, but if you look at them, right, if you look at the early Christian faith, you can have peace with early Christians. It's actually pretty easy to understand that, right? But now let's do the exact opposite, right? Let's look at Islam and say, all right, if we wanted an Islamic Reformation, which by the way is the whole point behind, again, Wahhabism, what would it actually look like? And then in order to do that, you have to look at the Quran, and then you have to look at the Hadith. And then the Quran says that Muhammad is the perfect pattern of conduct. Okay, now we need to look at what Muhammad did that's not recorded in the Quran, so we have to look in the Hadith. Oh, he was a warlord. So warlordism, right? Make no peace with the unbeliever, right? All of the unbelievers are kafir, and all unbelieving lands and all apostate lands, and are dar ar harb, right? The house of war, right? You can't have peace with that, right? Because if you want them to be, because if they're more faithful, if they take their religion seriously, they're gonna fuck with you. right? It's almost a religious duty if you've actually read these things, right? The desert religions love to find loopholes and argue with God's Old Testament people are cray-cray. A little bit. Like the whole corporeal thing with like Islam too isn't even like a specifically Islam thing. That actually did come from argumentation with you can find corporealists, for example, in the Talmud, right? Where you had rabbis arguing about whether or not God has a body or he does not have a body, right? So the whole corporealism thing, because Islam isn't just Tawhid, where it's got just this abstract principle with a personality that is God, right? No, Allah is corporeal. He has a physical body, a physical but spiritual body with only 2 right hands, no left hand, and he has only 1 shin and a face that will apparently like survive the when the rest of his body does not. It's very strange, very very strange teachings about Allah in the Hadith. But they are corporealists, so it does get stranger the more you look into the like religiously binding teachings of Sahih Hadith.
Sword and scimitar, I think. So that's what was happening, and as I mentioned,
but the thing I was going for, right? Christianity actually teaches that reality is ordered and rational, right? That it's apprehendable to the rational mind because it was created by a rational mind, right? The mind of God. Islam does not share that same thing, right? The Islamic Golden Age did not come about from like Arab learning. It came about from Persian and Greek learning. The Persians were Zoroastrians before, and it's interesting now that Iran is entirely Muslim, right? I wonder, was their religion so good that all of the Zoroastrians decided to convert? That's not what happened. And think about Turkey. It's like, yes, everyone there is for the most part Muslim. Well, they used to all be Eastern Catholics. What the hell happened here? Right? Was Islam such a good religion that everyone just decided to convert, or was something else going on there? It turns out that Islam converts primarily by the sword, historically speaking, right? We're going to oppress you to the point you can't stand it, and we're going to coerce you to convert. That way your children will be, part of our ranks as well. Muslims are the reasons Roman 12:18 emphasizes the first part, if it be possible. As much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men, if the most is the most important word there. I would agree, yes. I would agree. Obviously, this doesn't mean you treat every individual Muslim the same, right? You have some examples of people who genuinely think Islam is compatible with peace. They're wrong, but they're wrong in the same way that many lay Christians and lay Jews are wrong about their faith, right? They're just not familiar with what their faith actually teaches. Happens all the fucking time. God has no left hands. Left-handers cannot get a break. I mean, the corporealism of Allah is very strange. Hi, everybody. Those are not actually Muslims by their own teachings. I mean, you are correct. You are correct. In order to be a Muslim, according to the Quran, you must submit yourself to all of the judgments, in all judgments, to Muhammad and his teaching, right? So you must venerate Muhammad as the perfect pattern of conduct, but you must only adore Allah, who taught him how to behave, right? So it's again, you can't really escape it. Like, there's not really a way to reform Islam, because if you actually take your faith seriously, you're going to end up becoming ISIS or the IRGC.
And when the First Crusade went, we also have this curious aspect of all these indigenous Christians, Armenians, Assyrians, falling.
And to your point, the Quran also says that do not make friends with the Christians and the Jews, because the Christians and Jews are friends of each other, and whoever makes of them friends are themselves Christians and Jews. So again, there is a hard line. Do not mingle with these people taught in the Quran unless absolutely necessary, kind of deal, right? For taqiyya and kitman, and again, like self-preservation purposes.
On the floor and like kissing the feet of the Crusaders, saying thank you. And wherever the Crusaders would show up, for example, in Edessa, the Christian subject people would actually help them to overthrow the Muslim rulers. So it's amazing that here's a textbook saying, and the Alexius, what you're talking about, I'm familiar with his letters, as I am with Pope Urban II and what he said. And what they do is it's a litany list of all the atrocities that the Muslims, as I'm describing, were committing.
And the reason for this is because they're trying to, again, it's holding themselves accountable to just war theory, right? Just war theory at the time, right? In fact, like the three-pronged just war theory is a modern invention. I think it's a better way to conduct war. But in the Middle Ages, the just war theory had only two primary modes of concern: right means and right cause, right? Do you have the right cause, an appropriate cause for war, right? If you don't, the war is unjust. Secondly, are you conducting war in the correct means? Now, that doesn't mean be pansy, that doesn't mean let yourself lose, right? You still expect it to actually fight and win. But it does mean that you can't do things that are intrinsically evil, which, if you've ever watched a Celestium stream and then you hear her talk about, like, oh yeah, I don't want to go back to the Crusades, right? The things that they did to us, yeah, that was actually a violation of the right means, right? You don't go around and plunder, after you won, you can't just go and plunder civilians that you were just defending, right? So, yeah, I mean, there are means to criticize specific acts during all this, but yeah.
Talk about pulling the entrails out of people, Christians, tying them to columns and whipping them, making them run circles around the columns until their guts completely spill and die. Okay, so and raping women on altars. We have lots of documentation of that.
I wonder why you would do that other than just to like abjectly humiliate someone, right? Huh. Interesting that they do this, right? Yeah, it doesn't sound like there's any love in their heart for any of these people, right? It kind of sounds like these people doing this are filled with hatred.
And here is a textbook telling you, oh no, that's all lies. And actually the bad guy is the Christian, because he just wanted to go there, not to help Christians, but just because he was a bad man who wanted to hurt peaceful Muslims.
Always look at the citations for this kind of stuff, because it's very often how a lot of these people just do not have contemporaneous citations for the things that they're claiming, right? I remember, like, in when Christopher Hitchens wrote that, wrote his book, and he was talking about Mother Teresa. And no matter what you think about Mother Teresa, it's not really relevant. But the issue is like, well, did he evidence his claims? And you look at the actual citation page, for those claims, and it's like, oh, there's actually a lot of missing material here. There's not a lot of citations for these claims at all, it seems, right? That's always a really interesting thing. So always try to check the citations when you get the opportunity.
Did I get that right?
What's really...
And again, these Muslim apologists will do this exact same thing, right? They will cite each other, but oftentimes they will not really cite contemporaneous sources, right? Because the contemporaneous sources will make them look really fucking bad.
What's really, I mean, this is depressing on so many levels. It's depressing on the level of, again, indoctrination, because people think, well, what difference does this make, you guys? Well, because people base their modern opinions on political decisions and who you vote for and what you think about, I don't know, mass Islamic immigration in the United States on information that's not correct because they've been taught stuff like this.
Yep.
But it's what's really depressing is, if I'd have to go back and look, it's over there. I don't want to get up, but Diker and Spielvogel, if I remember correctly, one of these two is actually an Islamic historian, if I remember correctly. So they know better. I mean, your only two alternatives.
Exactly, right? And that's the thing. The reason they don't cite the contemporaneous sources is because oftentimes the bad actors will actually just admit to doing the things that they're doing because they don't think it is bad or shameful, right? It's like, oh yeah, we're humiliating the kafir, right? It's like, oh yeah, we're destroying those that God hates, right? Because, by the way, Allah actually does hate according to the Quran, right? So it's like, yeah, why would you be ashamed? Why would you not admit that, right? Like, if anything, you would probably be proud about that if your entire purpose is to serve as a good servant to Allah, right? So then why do you think that these people would actually say that they're not doing that when this is like absolutely the thing that they're going to admit to, right? And they do admit to it quite often, right?
Are either they are massively ignorant, in which case...
Nope. In this case, this is not... Again, when you're starting to talk about like academics like this is almost certainly not the case.
I mean, look, there's a lot of stuff that goes into World Survey history text. I mean, I shudder to think, trying to write about stuff about like Chinese history, which I would know very little about. But you have to vet.
Just like how the scumbags streamed the evil actions they were taking on October 7th. Yeah, because these people thought that they were defending the holiest, one of the holiest sites in Islam, right? Al-Aqsa. In fact, that's what they called the operation on October 7th. It was the Al-Aqsa, which is, again, one of the most holy mosques in Islam, defense, defense. And the reason why is because, let's be fair, there is a contingent. It's not an overwhelming contingent, but there is a contingent of like Jewry that do want to destroy the Al-Aqsa mosque to then rebuild the third temple, right? That is not necessarily the overwhelming opinion, but that is an extant opinion. And again, as a propagandist, if you want to encourage war between the Arab world and Israel, that's one way that, you could focus on those and you can make it seem like, oh yeah, this is an imminent threat. It's not. And so we have to defend it now, right? And then boom, there you go. It's like they don't have to be ashamed of anything they did, because all they're doing is they're defending they're defending the religion that they hold so dear, right? Of course they don't feel ashamed about this. They think they're on the right side, right? Let's see.
This stuff. I've served as a reviewer for some of these books before. A new textbook was coming out some years ago, and they sent me a bunch of stuff, want to know if I could vet it, go through this section and see if this stuff on Islam and stuff is accurate. And this was one just a few years ago, and it was much.
But the thing about the Al-Aqsa thing is also just complete cope, because there's a secondary reason for this, and it's because, again, the end times prediction in Islam is very clear that there has to be a holocaust of Jewry in order for the end times to occur, right? We've all heard the hadithical quote of, again, the servant of Allah, the Muslim, will hunt down the Jews, and then the Jews will hide behind a tree or a stone, and the tree and the stone will cry out, "Oh, Muslim, servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him." And they will come and kill him, except for the Garkad. The Garkad will not call out, because it is the tree of the Jews, right? This is something that is quoted quite often in Islamic terrorist organizations. So it's not exactly like this is a fringe religious belief. They do believe this. Let's see. So just remember, the Garkad ain't no snitch. He stands with his crew. He's the shade in the heat when they coming for you, right? Let's see. To bring the end times. Yeah, I mean, anyone who wants to bring about the end times should be massively suspicious of, right? It doesn't matter if they're like Salafia or if they're like, again, Twelverists. Nah, dispensationalists, certain groups in the Chabad. Yeah, these groups, Marxists, because the whole Marxist project is, again, the end of history, i.e. the fulfillment of history, by returning to year zero, so you can go back to, so you can get to end state communism, which is just a rediscovery of primitive communism. That's also apocalyptic, right? So it beat me to it. It's a great beat, right? Of course, anytime I bring up the Garkad, I'm going to say that, right? Because it's just, it's a funny song. Two, it's not wrong according to like their own sources. So it's like, why wouldn't we just parody that, right?
It was much.
I'm telling you, I'm going to be the first VTuber to get a fatwa on my head. It's going to fucking happen.
Better than some of the stuff I'm reading, but either the guys doing the textbook are ignorant and didn't do their homework, or they're.
I don't believe this. I do not fucking believe this. First of all, again, we already know that the Quran and the Hadith are very clear that you can tell a half-truth, kitman, or a complete lie, taqiyya, in order to advance the cause of Islam. And in fact, that's why dawah is sometimes in the West called dawah-ganda. It's a portmanteau of dawah, i.e., Islamic apologetics, and propaganda for a reason, right? Because functionally speaking, that's what it is. But also, if you just look at Marxists, right, and all of these intersectionalists, all of these post-colonialists, they're all Marxists, right? They may not necessarily believe in the economic Marxism, but you can recreate a lot of their thought patterns by just switching out the key terms in the class conflict, right? How do you want to create post-colonialism? It's really simple. Just switch out bourgeoisie with colonists, and then switch out proletarian with the colonized, right? And you don't even have to be at the time, right? We're not even talking then. We're talking about like the descendants, right? And then you want to, again, recreate feminism, just switch out bourgeoisie with female, and then proletariat. Bourgeoisie with male. My bad. And proletariat with female. But you want to recreate Tateism? Just invert that, right? Because all Tateism is fucking like gender inverted feminism. You want to recreate again critical race theory? Again, the bourgeoisie, white. The proletariat, BIPOC. And all you have to do is remember these terms encode their relations, right? Bourgeoisie and proletarian are class terms according to the Marxists. So obviously, when you have those as your terms in the class conflict, that's going to be a class economic conflict, right? Well, when you switch them out with racial terms, now it becomes obviously a racial conflict, as with critical race theory or Nazism, funny enough, although it's not as easy to recreate Nazism that way. You have to add a bunch of pagan German bullshit there. And then again, with feminism, it's just now a sex class conflict. And then with post-colonialism, it is a historical national origin conflict. And then also you want to do it with queer theory too. This is why, again, you have this strange alliance between Muslims and the queer theorists, right? Is because all you got to do is switch out bourgeoisie with heteronormative, and then proletariat with queer. And there's an interesting wordplay that happens here, right? By queer, they don't mean gay. That's a Mott and Bailey strategy, right? What they mean is an anti-essential, right? Queer is defined in queer theoretic literature as an identity without an essence, right? A permanently unstable, perpetually revolutionary identity, right? And then when you look at the bourgeoisie term, it's heteronormative, right? Drop the hetero part out because that's an obfuscation. It's the normative part that's the issue, right? So queer theory is normalcy Marxism masked as sex Marxism. Although to be fair, there is a sex Marxism. You can actually recreate this dynamic with the transgender ideology as well. All of these fucking people are Marxists, just in various different modes, right? Marx himself was adamant that they would have to engage in the ruthless criticism of all that exists, but he only thought economically speaking. His students, much like how he thought differently than his teacher Hegel, his students expanded his efforts out into every aspect you can think of, right? That's the reason why there's so much that's why Kierkegaard calls all these people communists. They effectively are, right? And yes, these communists will lie to you. They have no problem with that, right? So, and again, the reason why you see the coalition between, again, the gay communists and the Muslims is because, one, common enemy, right? The West, but two, because they see Palestinians and Muslims as part of the colonized group, they are part of the workers of the world, right? Just think of any of these proletarian switch outs, workers of the world, right? So workers of the world unite. We all got to come together, right? And that's how you get the Red-Green Alliance. And then the Red-Green Alliance always collapses because either the communists put their foot down on the throat of the Muslims, as in China, or the Muslims kill off all the leftists, as what happened in Iran, right? I could be considered queer because I am slightly demisexual, need emotional connection to be intimate. I call that being a normal human being. Right? A normal, well-adjusted human being. Let's see. The left is not event innovative. Oh yeah, they're definitely not. Hello, Philip. Hello, Great Green Great Green Goo.
Either way, it's like, well, why are you teaching people? Why are you putting textbooks out that teach people if you're doing one of those two things?
So what you're telling me is that not a damn person actually reads what their ideologue wrote or extrapolate correctly what their intentions were? Well, that's the whole point of the useful idiot. The person on the ground doesn't actually have to know anything about the theory, right? All they have to do is be directed in such a way that they're useful. And in fact, that's why communists always have useful idiots, right? And that's also why, again, Muslim, the Ummah will use useful idiots in Islam, right? People who can make Islam look better. Think about, for example, Sneeko. Or like any of these other fucking cringe fake Muslim apologists out there, right? Because they just need the ability to get their foot in the door, because once they can actually pry that door open, the idea is to force their way in and take control of the house, right? So, let's see. Exactly, it's just normal, but they tried to put being normal into LGBT. Yes, because they're trying to destabilize people's conceptions of the real.
That point you just made, I've made before, and I think it's really important for people to understand, which is when a person says something that is demonstrably false, Okay, there's only two things. There's only two explanations. This person knows better and is intentionally lying, or this person is ignorant. And like you said,
I mean, to be fair, they could also be crazy, but in this case, that's not really an option here.
if that's the case, why is this person teaching and writing history books?
Why would I
Yep.
listen to you? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, like we said, this is demonstrable. I mean, all the examples you've been giving, some are subtle, little word games that they play about, Prophet Muhammad.
Part of this is, again, because the West is the great enemy of communism. Specifically, the Soviets had two main enemies. They were the United States, obviously, right? It was a large, mostly capitalist, not completely capitalist, but mostly capitalist, society that worked, right? That's kind of a big threat to the communist plan, right? But also, one of their other enemies was the Catholic Church, which is why they spent so much time and effort to subvert the Catholic Church and to subvert the American culture, right? They spent a lot of time, and eventually the Soviet Union collapsed, obviously, right? But the efforts of the Soviet Union carried on because the true believers still continued to do their work in the United States and in the infiltrators in the Catholic Church. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get to root these rats out of every place that they are, because, in my opinion, we should never suffer toleration of a communist, to be perfectly honest, right? These people are subversive, they lie, they abjectly hate you. Never suffer toleration of a communist, right? This is why I support covenant communities, right? Communities coming together, forming a covenant with each other, being like, look, we will not sell our property to anyone who does not agree to the covenantal rules, right? And again, if you keep if you keep the roads themselves, right? If the property line goes all the way into the middle of the road, which is the case in some places, right? If someone comes into the property and into the community, you could trespass their ass, right? And how do you deal with trespass? Well, I mean, right now it's like, again, we're going to ask you to leave, and if you don't leave, we're going to force you or physically remove you, right? So, I'm a big proponent of covenant communities and physical removal. Never suffer a communist, right? While I asked AI Mark's age when he wrote his retarded works, and it responded that is offensive and inaccurate, and his works are foundational to modern sociology. Okay, so they are foundational to modern sociology, which is why sociology has had an issue with the reproducibility, right? It's built on a lot of faulty assumptions that are not true, right? Economics or at least conflict theory, right? Interactionism, not so much. Interactionism is actually a decent theory in sociology, but most sociologists adhere to conflict theory, which is heavily based off of Karl Marx and political theory. We need to figure out how to get rid of this stuff. I mean, AI is actually pretty easy to deal with this. You can actually just word the prompt correctly, but for a normie who's not thinking about this, yes, this is a problem. Let's see, subvert, they did, yes. SSPX could be the solution. That is not the solution, because you can also go way too far in the other direction. The Catholic Church can't abrogate itself in order to save itself, right? What makes it ironic is that communism was founded in the West. Yes, in fact, actually, it's like, it's like China likes to propose itself as like, again, the real inheritor, right? The true inheritor of Chinese culture. But it's like, no, but like a German ideology, like, is the foundation of your entire system. So no, you're not, right? Catholic Church was never good. The Catholic Church has actually been one of the biggest forces for good the world has ever seen. Like, it is actually absurd how much good was actually done because of the Catholic Church specifically. Even during the time of like the British Empire, the two greatest forces for good before the United States came about were the Roman Catholic Church and the Church of England.
Muhammad, but Jesus of Nazareth. But it's still obvious. It's intentionally disingenuous. But now we're getting to some deep stuff, like that last one, trying to make Alexius making it all up. We're talking about literally decades of carnage of Christians, systematically at the hands of the Seljuk Turks, and this is not a short time. This is not decades. They put up with this for hundreds of years. Like, it is ridiculous how long the Christian world, Christendom, put up with Muslim aggression. Now, to be perfectly honest,
If people could actually like put aside their own irrational disdain for each other, the whole problem with Islam could have been nipped in the butt if the Zoroastrians and the Christians, who by the way were at war with each other before Islam came, onto the thing. Spanish Inquisition is overinflated. First of all, the Inquisition didn't kill nearly as many people as people thought. Second of all, it wasn't the church that killed them. The church actually advocated that the people being killed should be let go because, again, it was the state, the actual civil society that was holding the Inquisitions. The church did things like, for example, placing limitations on how someone could force a confession out of someone, and that included things like you can't really beat a person to force a confession. So all of the restrictions, all of the pushing away from the Inquisition was not done. The Inquisition was not held by the church. The Inquisition was actually resisted by the church. But there's only so much a bunch of bishops can do when kings and superstitious laymen want to get their way. So yeah, the Inquisition is not a good example. The Inquisition actually proves my point.
Again, copious documentation. Here you got people just saying, "Oh yeah, it was all a lie, never happened." Right. That's a real issue. And you also made another point, which I guess, which is really important for people to understand, which is, and I we'll get to this more, I think, towards the end because this is the ultimate point.
I heard the Spanish Inquisition would often give you a fairer trial than the local institutions would. It depends on what we mean by the Spanish Inquisition, right? Because people will weasel word their precise definitions of this and like who exactly they're talking about. But as far as the church is, right, the official church structures would be way more fair than the civil prosecutors were. So yeah, again, and it's not just that, right? It's not just the Spanish Inquisition. We can't just look at the Spanish Inquisition and be like, oh yeah, the church is bad, right? The church is also the only thing that stopped rampant pederasty across the entire European continent, right? That was a widespread practice across most of the pagan world. And it is the Catholic Church and the Church of England that brought that to a stop across most of the planet, right? So it's like, again, we're cherry picking examples here. I would never suggest Catholicism is evil. There are evil sects hiding behind falsehoods of Catholicism virtues that causes the overall disdain of Catholicism as a whole, which is not fair to Catholicism. I mean, there's always bad actors in any given group, right? Especially when like you're the largest religion on the planet, right? You're gonna have bad actors, right? Just think about like everyone blaming Christopher Columbus for shit he didn't do, when it's like when you read the actual historical sources, it's like, oh, he actually cut off the hands of one of his own men because they wouldn't stop molesting the natives. This doesn't exactly sound like a historical villain to me, right? Let's see. So manipulation by the state, yes. Let's see. Nobody ever expects the Spanish Inquisition.
But it's the why. Okay, why this is, because it really does. It's not just some random history, like kind of like, okay, that's what happened.
Yeah, you have to remember, the Catholic Church doesn't actually believe in magic for the most part. That's not an actual official doctrine of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has actually been very skeptical for most of its time about witchcraft, for example. So they're not exactly going to be the spearheads of a Inquisition. Just think about like Augustine. Augustine was like the great theologian until Thomas Aquinas, right? And he was very adamant. It was like the powers of witches do not actually exist, right? So it's like the pagans, unironically, were more like prone to trying people for witchcraft than the Catholic Church actually was. Let's see. Let's see. Anything good eventually used by evil men for evil purposes? Yes. That's not to say that the good is not still, let's see, still there. Quite the opposite. Just that evil men do what evil men do. Precisely.
Who cares what I believe? No, these thoughts, once they get into your head, they actually they control how you think about the present too. And
to your point about bad actors, right? To your point about bad actors, the modern occult actually does draw from Catholic priests. This was never actually affirmed by the Catholic Church. In fact, the Catholic Church itself, like popes and like archbishops, tried to root this shit out, right? But like, there's a reason why a lot of grimoires were written in Latin. Latin was the language of, again, learned men. In fact, the word illiterate didn't originally mean can't read. Turns out, if your native language is French, it's not that hard to learn how to read French, considering, again, you can just learn the rules to the system, right? English is a little bit different because of the way that, like, we have weird exceptions because of our history. But it's like, Greek is basically phonetically spelled, right? So it's not that hard to learn native old languages because they're basically spelled phonetically. But there was a thing called the necromantic underground, which was an underground illicit behavior of Catholic priests, right? This was not something condoned by the Catholic Church. It was something that the Catholic Church actually tried to stamp out among bad actors, right? Kind of sounds like something that's currently happened with Marxists and, you know, positions of authority in the Catholic Church right now, right? But yeah, like the reason why so many like grimoires of the time, i.e. books of spells and magic, right, were written in Latin is because it turns out, again, when a lot of these people, when they were doing things like exorcisms, some people had the common sense to understand it's like, hey, you can't necessarily trust the servant of the Prince of Lies when they tell you something, right? And others was like, hey, wait a minute, maybe we can coerce some hidden information out of these things, right? And then they just like apparently have no common sense and just ran with it, right? Because it turns out bishops and, you know, priests, they're human beings. They're prone to the same things. It's like even popes, like popes have not all been good, right? There have been some pretty shitty popes in, you know, history. No one, even in the Catholic world, is going to deny any of this, right? The necromantic underground is like a prime example of bad actors in a good institution doing really bad things, but it wasn't something the church at the time was actually unaware of. In fact, they were trying really fucking hard to stop the practice. Let's see. I remember, hold on. To be fair, doesn't the Old Testament imply Ramses' court magicians were using magic, or am I mistaken? I mean, they were, but whether or not you believe that those powers actually exist for, you know, if those were like, it depends on what you mean by magic, right? Like, do you think that there was really some kind of ontological change that was performed by the manipulation of signs and symbols that they were doing, or was the magic kind of like with many of the idols in the Old Testament? For example, like in the case of like this is in the Septuagint, this isn't in the Masoretic text, but in what the fuck is it called? Bel and the Dragon, where Daniel, if I remember correctly, actually exposes the priests of Baal by, you know, leaving, you know, they have an experiment, right? Oh yeah, leave some food for the idol, because the idol allegedly eats food, right? But before the temple was closed, let's put some flour on the floor, right? Just in case, you know, something else that's not the idol eats the thing, right? And it turns out, like, next day, open it up, and it's like, oh yeah, there's like someone actually came in and ate the ate the offering. It wasn't the idol that ate the offering. They were able to figure out who did it, right? It's basically an old school Scooby-Doo episode, to be perfectly honest. And yeah, again, there's no committal that like magic is actually that you have to believe in magic in order to believe in the Old Testament, right? Because it doesn't make any kind of like anyway. Yeah, long story short, right? Let's see. I remember them turning their stabs into snakes or something. I mean, to be fair, modern magicians can do a lot of weird stuff too. It's all deception, right? It's all, again, the manipulation of your sense perception. You mean Satanism, Scientology, and the sort. I mean, yeah, those are all cults. Those are all cultic systems that, again, undermine the real. Magic doesn't exist, but I'm convinced spells do. Words of power spoken in a specific way. Okay, so, I mean, yeah, you can cast a spell on a person by manipulating the way they see the world, but that's not really doing anything. That's just basic psychology, to be perfectly honest. I've seen it several times, but I'm not Catholic, but I will defend it as ultimately it is a force of Christ. The deeds for some do not and should not outweigh the good done. I mean, defensible position. I agree. I am also not religious, but I prefer Christian culture more than anything. Yeah, if I had to pick a religion to rule over me, I would pick Christianity over Islam or, you know, Hinduism or a lot of other stuff. Genjutsu exists, right? That's the whole point of hyperreality and postmodernism, right? Scientology's founder is hilarious. Yes, he is.
I think that's the whole point, which we can address.
All right, so there's that. Now, let us move on to the reading part. So we have a article here to read, and I don't know how long this is going to take me, so depending on how long this is, hopefully we should be able to get through this, right? So this is Jihad Begot the Crusades by Andrew G. Boston. This was published on May 4th, 2005. I've had this in my back pocket for a while, right? Psychology is magic. Or, you know, is magic psychology, right? Let's see. Part 2, including endnotes, can be read here. I also had to find... So I had to use the Wayback Machine to find this. And I had to use the Wayback Machine to find the article 2, right? So... because apparently this is not supported anymore. The New York... What? Okay, immediately at the mispronunciation. Fuck. The New York Times, Alan writing, recently opined the Crusades were waged by European monarchs, lords, knights, and their armies of devout followers to fight and settle in an area stretching between what is today Syria and Egypt. The Muslims responded, emphasis added, with their own sporadic jihads until finally in 1291 the Christians had been driven out. Huh. Who were the inhabitants of this area before Islam was invented, right? Friendship is magic. God bless the Wayback Machine, yes. He further lauds the fact that in Ridley Scott's new film portrayal of the Crusades, Kingdom of Heaven, Mr. Scott and his screenwriter, William Monahan, have tried to be balanced. Muslims are portrayed as bent on coexistence until Christian extremists ruin everything. Emphasis added. Which again, we can see in modern times is not really how that happens, given Lebanon was made to be a Christian homeland that gave equal protection to Muslims, and let's just say it wasn't the Christians who ruined that, right? Let's see. There's a reason why in Lebanon, again, I'm going to point this out, the president of Lebanon is by law a practicing Maronite Catholic, but by law, the prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim. Wonder why most people don't even know this, right? Let's see. Little wonder then that the jihadist organization CARE, this was back when calling CARE a jihadist organization was actually quite controversial, waxed enthusiastic about the film following an advanced screening. Unfortunately, such ahistorical claptrap has become standard fare for journalistic and even pseudo-scholarly summary assessments of the Crusades. I don't know whether the is capitalized here. Perhaps the most egregious example of the latter being this reductio ad absurdum commentary by John Esposito, the doyen of academic apologists for Islam. 5 centuries of peaceful coexistence elapsed before political events and imperial papal power play led to centuries-long series of so-called holy wars, emphasis added, that pitted Christendom against Islam and left an enduring legacy of misunderstanding and distrust. Let's see. Islam and Dimitude, interesting title, right? 2002, Bat Ye'or analyzed Esposito's summary account of the first half millennium of jihad conquests. Bat Ye'or notes how Esposito completely ignores the concepts of jihad and Dar al-Harb, and she highlights the thematic structure of Esposito's selective overview, typical of the prevailing modern apologetic genre. Historical negationism, consisting of suppressing or sketching in a page or a paragraph 1,000 years of jihad, which is presented as a peaceful conquest, generally welcomed by the vanquished populations, the omission of Christian and in particular Muslim sources describing the actual methods of these conquests, pillage, enslavement, deportation, massacres, and so on. The mythical historical conversion of centuries of peaceful coexistence, masking the processes which transformed majorities into minorities, constantly at risk of extinction, and obligatory self-incrimination for the Crusades. Does this kind of sound like anything recent? Right? Inundated by such disingenuous apologetics, Westerners have remained largely ignorant of jihad. the Islamic War of Conquest. Thus, the chattering classes, confused all too easily by superficial similarities, equate jihad with the Crusades. I love, again, yes, because they are superficial similarities. Let's see. In fact, there are many fundamental differences between the uniquely Islamic institution of jihad. And again, I love that they point this out. This is uniquely Islamic, right? This is not something that was... jihad has no real parallel in Zoroastrian culture. It didn't have a parallel in Tengris culture. It didn't have a parallel in Christian culture. Didn't have a parallel in Jewish in religion. It didn't have a parallel in Hindu or Buddhist or Shinto culture. This is a uniquely jihad. This is a uniquely Muslim thing, right? And the Crusades, as they derive from widely divergent religions and civilizations. Jihad, as a nascent ideology, originated from the putative military activities of Muhammad himself, described in the Muslim sacred texts. September 622 CE. I'm going to say AD instead of CE, but it says CE in here. Marks a defining event in Islam, the Hijra. Muhammad and a coterie of followers, the Muhajirun, persecuted by fellow Banu Quraysh tribesmen who rejected Muhammad's authenticity as a divine messenger, fled from Mecca to Yathrib, later known as Al-Medina, Medina. If you couldn't have figured that out, right? Gill notes that Muslim sources describe Yathrib as having been a Jewish city founded by a Palestinian diaspora population which had survived the revolt against the Romans. Distinct from the nomadic Arab tribes, the Jews of northern Arabian Peninsula were highly productive oasis farmers. These Jews were eventually joined by itinerant Arab tribesmen from southern Arabia who settled adjacent to them and transitioned to a sedentary existence. So let me catch up with chat for just a bit. Let's see. Crusades did kill Jews too, but wondering why. Okay, so part of it is because there were Jews that actually helped the Muslims, right? There's a complex reason behind this, and I could get into the Talmud for this, but it's one of those things where it's like, yes, this did happen. Yes, people oversimplify this. Let's see, that sounds like a Nolan movie. Hello, Supai 420. Hey, Cosmic, by the way. So, there's no real universal Jewish teaching on a lot of things, right? In fact, you'll find, for example, in the Talmud, you'll find there are rabbis who are very pro-Christian. Think of, for example, Rabbi Eliezer, who, by the way, the passage on Eliezer positions him as a quaint fool, even though it also portrays him as being objectively right? And then there are passages in the Talmud, which does not, which is a collection of jurisprudential rulings across, the debates of rabbis, which it frames the enemies of the Jews as the Amalek, which is like the Canaanites, right? The Romans, again, Roman occupation, and the Christians, i.e., because the Christians are heretics, right? And then you combine Rome with Christianity, i.e., Christian Rome, and then you got double the enemyhood right there. So there is historically a lot of animosity between certain Jews and the Western world because it's basically two historical enemies that have merged into one. But again, this is one of those things where it's like, it really depends on where in the Talmud you read, because the Talmud contradicts itself all the time, because it's not one author who read it. It is literally just, again, a bunch of different rabbis making different rulings at different times on different things. And they will disagree with each other on a lot of things. So, and, one of the things that they disagreed on is, sometimes certain people in the Jewish community would actually help the Muslims, much to their own destruction, it seems, right? Because it's not like the Muslims treat them very well either. Of course, it was a woman who fucked it up. Let's see. My interpretation of Islam makes it the most tolerant religion on earth. Yep. Are these people not aware that Muslim crusaders tried to demolish the Great Pyramids? That is very crusade behavior. Crusade behavior. I mean, I don't think that would be crusade behavior. Again, like the Romans had control over Egypt because, the Christians had control over Egypt because, Roman Christianity, right? Wow, look at that. I was thinking that too at Cosmic. Okay. Hey, the Talmud mentions Jesus. Talmud is from Babylon. Oh, okay, so there's two Talmuds. There's the Jerusalem Talmud and there's the Babylonian Talmud, right? And again, there are different rulings on Jesus specifically in the Talmud, right? Obviously, you have some that are more positive about Christianity and some that are way more negative about Christianity, right? In fact, there are several cases in the Talmud which actually affirm Christian teachings, such as, penal substitution theory. Again, this is one of those things where it's like, if you read the whole text, it actually is one of those things where it's like people on both sides do take it out of context, because it's a very easy text to take out of context if you're either pro or like anti the book, right? Like all old books are, a bunch of authors, or rather storytellers, who had their stories put into written form. A Hebrew woman did the poison of a warlord, Muhammad. Yes, at the Battle of Khaybar, right? Which was a good thing. I mean, it definitely had a good effect, right? Okay, where was I? Yeah. Okay, I was at the end of this. Following Muhammad's arrival, he created a new order as described by Gill, establishing a covenant between the tribes which imposed its authority on every clan and its members, which soon enabled him to attack the Jews and eventually wipe out the Jewish population of the town. Some were banned from the towns, others were executed, and their property, plantations, fields, and houses was distributed by Muhammad along his followers, who were destitute refugees from Mecca. He also used the former property of the Jews to establish a war fund, setting up a well-equipped army corps of cavalry troops like the likes of which had never before been seen on the Arabian Peninsula. Muhammad eventually believed in the capacity of this army, imbued with fiery religious belief, to perform great and sensational feats of valor. Right? Let's see. Richard Bell summarized Muhammad's first interactions with the Jews and Christians of Medina and northern Arabia, his analysis based upon the sacred Muslim texts, i.e. Quran, Hadith, and Sirah. So, by the way, when you're talking about Hadith, you also have to be careful which Hadith you use, right? Because there is actually a different collection of Hadith for the Sunni and the Shia. I think the Sunni have the 5 books and the Shia have the 4 books, and there is actually a great bit of distinction between them, right? I also have a copy of the Sirah, so I have like 5 Qurans and like different translations. I have a complete Sunni Hadith collection, and I might be mistaken, but I think I have the Sirat Rasul Ilah as well. Let's see. Authoritative Quranic commentaries and narratives of Muhammad's chronicles of early Islam also underscored the theological basis of the Great Jihad. His relations with the Jews Jews from a part of form. God damn, I can't read right now. Form a part of all biographies of Muhammad, for they worked out to a bitter and savage conclusion in the course of his first few years of residence in Medina. Shortly after the Battle of Badr, a Jewish tribe, the Bani Kainuka, were deprived of their goods and expelled from Medina. The Bani Nadir were similarly expelled some 2 years later, and finally the Bani Qurayza were besieged, and after capitulation at discretion were slaughtered. So again, you surrender and they still kill you, right? Their goods confiscated, their women and children enslaved. This bitter hostility was no doubt due to the annoyance with which the opposition of the Jews caused him. In Muhammad's mind, there also rankled the old feeling that the Jews had misled him in regards to what the revelation contained. And having discovered that Jesus had been a prophet to the Bani Israel, it's kind of hard for me to pronounce that in Arabic, who the Jews had rejected, he may have in his own mind been justified in his harsh dealing with them by the reflection that they were renegades who had already more than once rejected the divine message. But when Muhammad's power began to spread in Arabia, his attitude towards the Christians soon began to cool. Any real alliance or even peaceful accommodation was indeed impossible from the first. Muhammad's complaints, so this is Quran chapter 2, verse 113 and 114, that neither Jews nor Christians will be satisfied with him until he follows their milia or type of religion. It was just as impossible for him to make concessions. Thus, the relationship with the Christians ended as that with the Jews ended, in war. Let's see. We know that before the end of his life, Muhammad was in conflict with Christian populations in the north of Arabia and even within the confines of the Roman Byzantine Empire. What would have happened if he had lived, we do not know, but probably the policy which Abu Bakr carried on was the policy of Muhammad himself. There could have been no real compromise. He regarded himself as the vicegerent of God upon earth. The true religion could only be Islam as he laid it down. And acceptance of it meant acceptance of his divinely inspired authority. The hijrah and the execution of the divine vengeance upon the unbelievers of Mecca had given the immediate occasion for this organization of such a warlike community. The victory of Badr confirmed it. This is what it had grown to as a menace to whatever came in its way. Muhammad could not bide his time, but he was not the man to depart from a project which had once taken hold of his mind as involved in his prophetic mission and authority. He might look with favor upon much in Christianity, but unless Christians were prepared to accept his dictation as to what the true religion was, conflict was inevitable, and there could have been no real peace while he lived. So, let's see. I don't have an issue with all Muslims. It's the ones who act like animals and are trying to hurt others. I mean, I think that's basically everyone, right? Feats of valor like taking 40 men. Al Zut strikes again, right? Oh my god. Let's see. Within several centuries of Muhammad's death in 632 AD, based upon the proto-jihad campaigns he waged in Arabia, Muslim jurists and theologians formulated the institution of permanent jihad, war against non-Muslims, or kafir, for the submission of the known world to Islam. The essential pattern of jihad war is captured in the great Muslim historian Al-Tabari's recording of the recommendation given by Umar, I'm gonna guess that means bin. Umar bin al-Khattab to the commander of the troops he sent to al-Bashra, 636 AD, during the conquest of Iraq. Umar, the second rightly guided caliph, reportedly said, "Summon the people to God. Those who respond to your call, accept it from them. This is to say they accept their conversion as genuine and refrain from fighting them. But those who refuse must pay the poll tax," the jizya, "out of humiliation and lowliness." Quran 9:29. "If they refuse this, it is the sword without leniency. Fear God with regard to what you have been entrusted." So, jihad was pursued century after century because jihad, which means to strive in the path of Allah, embodied an ideology and a jurisdiction. Both were formally conceived by Muslim jurisconsults, I haven't seen that word in ages, theologians from the 8th to 9th centuries onwards, based on their interpretation of Quranic verses. For example, Surah 9, Ayah 5 and 6, Surah 9, Ayah 29, Surah 4, Ayah 74 through 79, Surah 2, Ayah 214 through 215, Surah 8, Ayah 39 through 42. Long chapters in the traditions, i.e. hadiths, act as the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, especially those recorded by al-Bukhari and Muslim. The concerns on the nature of jihad from all four schools of Sunni Islamic jurisprudence, i.e. Maliki, Hanbali, Hanafi, and Shafi'i is clear. I gotta slow down. Let's see. Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawi, Rawani, Malik jurist. Jihad is a precept of divine institution. Its performance by certain individuals may dispense others from it. We Malikis, one of the four schools of Muslim jurisprudence, maintain that it is preferable not to begin hostilities with the enemy before having invited the latter to embrace the religion of Allah, except where the enemy attacks first. They have the alternative of either converting to Islam or paying the poll tax, jizya, short of which war will be declared against them. Ibn Taymiyyah, Hanbali jurist. Since lawful warfare is essentially jihad, and since its aim is that the religion is God's entirely and God's word is uppermost, therefore, according to all Muslims, those who stand in the way of this aim must be fought. As for those who cannot offer resistance or cannot fight, such as women, children, monks, old people, the blind, handicapped, and their likes, they shall not be killed unless they actually fight with words, example by propaganda. So, by the way, your words can get you killed. And acts, example by spying or otherwise assisting in warfare. From primarily Hanafi school, as given in the Hidayah of Sheikh, another Star Wars name here, Burhanuddin Ali of Marghinan. So this is 1196. It is not lawful to make war upon any people who have never before been called to the faith, without previously requiring them to embrace it, because the Prophet so instructed his commanders, directing them to call the infidels to the faith, and also because the people will hence perceive that they are attacked for the sake of religion, and not for the sake of taking their property or making slaves of their children, and on this consideration it is possible that they may be induced to agree to the call in order to save themselves from the troubles of war. If the infidels, upon receiving the call, neither consent to it nor agree to pay capitation tax, it is then incumbent on the Muslim to call upon God for assistance and to make war upon them, because God is the assistant of those who serve him and the destroyer of his enemies, the infidels, and it is necessary to implore his aid upon every occasion. The Prophet, moreover, commands us to do so. Fight with words? That's crazy. Yep. Let's see. Well, I mean, a man killed a pregnant woman because she insulted Muhammad, and then Muhammad, gave him props, even as the man was being torn up on the inside for the guilt he was feeling. Right. So this is again following the pattern of conduct of Muhammad. Let's see. My mouth is dry. Al-Mawardi. So this is a 1058 Shafi jurist. The mushrikun, or infidels, of Dar al-Harb, the arena of battle, are of two types. First, those whom the call of Islam has reached, but they have refused it and have taken up arms. Their Amir of the army has the option of fighting them. Oh, it's Emir, okay. Let's see. In accordance with what he judges to be in the best interest of the Muslims and most harmful to the mushrikun. So it's not just, again, benefiting Islam, it's also maximizing the harm to the enemy. I keep accidentally blocking the fuck. I'm gonna move the chat over here. I don't understand why I didn't do this earlier. Where the fuck was I? Okay, yeah. So maximizing harm to the mushrikun is also part of the consideration, right? Let's see. Second, those whom the invitation to Islam has not reached, although such persons are few nowadays, since Allah has made manifest the call of his messenger, it is forbidden to begin an attack before explaining the invitation to Islam to them, informing them of the miracles of the Prophet, and making plain the proofs so as to encourage acceptance on their part. If they still refuse to accept after this, war is waged against them, and they are treated as those whom the call has reached. So, hydrate. Right? I'll do that after this article and before the next one. Let's see. Ibn Khaldun, jurist, Malik, so this is 1406, renowned philosopher, historian, and sociologist, summarized these consensus opinions from 5 centuries of prior Sunni Muslim jurisprudence with regard to the uniquely Islamic institution of jihad. In the Muslim community, the holy war is a religious duty because of universalism of the Muslim mission and the obligation to convert everybody to Islam either by persuasion or force. The other religious groups did not have a universal mission, and holy war was not a religious duty for them. Save only for purposes of defense, Islam is under obligation to power over other nations. So again, this is not like other nations. This is not like other religions. This was a novel innovation of the time. Let me turn on a fan. Hopefully that doesn't get caught by the microphone. Let's see. By the time of the classical Muslim historian Al-Tabari's death in 923, jihad wars had expanded the Muslim empire from Portugal to the Indian subcontinent. Subsequent Muslim conquests continued in Asia as well as on Christian Eastern European lands. The Christian kingdoms of Armenia, Byzantium, Bulgaria, Serbia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Croatia, and Albania, in addition to parts of Poland and Hungary, were also conquered and Islamized. When the Muslim armies were stopped at the gates of Vienna in 1683, over a millennium of jihad had transpired. These tremendous military successes spawned a triumphalist jihad literature. Muslim historians recorded in detail the number of infidels slain or enslaved, the cities and villages which were pillaged, and lands, treasures, and movable goods seized. Christian, Coptic, Armenian, Jacobite, Greek, Slav, etc., as well as Hebrew sources, and even the scant Hindu and Buddhist writings which survived the ravages of the Muslim conquests, independently validate this narrative and complement the Muslim perspective by providing testimonies of the suffering of the non-Muslim victims of jihad wars. Oh, by the way, yeah, look into how many people died in India because of Muslim conquest. It's absolutely crazy. You think it was bad in the Christian world? They killed a lot of Indians. Let's see. From its earliest inception through the present, jihad has been central to the thought and writings of prominent Muslim theologians and jurists. The precepts and regulations elucidated in the 7th through 9th centuries are immutable in the Muslim theological juridical system. They have remained essentially unchallenged by the majority of contemporary Muslims. The jihad is intrinsic to the sacred Muslim texts, including the divine Quranic revelation itself, whereas the Crusades were circumscribed historical events subjected to ongoing and meaningful criticism by Christians themselves. Again, like the Byzantines, for example, right? Unlike the espousal of jihad in the Quran, the constituent texts of Christianity, the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, do not contain a form frust. I actually have never seen that word, or at least I don't remember what this word means. Institutionalization of the Crusades. I mean, in context, I know what it means, but I've never seen. I don't remember ever seeing that word in particular. The Bible sanctions the Israelite conquest of Canaan, a limited domain. It does not sanction a permanent war to submit all nations of humanity to a uniform code of religious law. And also, by the way, the subject of Canaan, it also, like, yeah, sure, there is like Middle Eastern like war like rhetoric about like completely destroy, completely like annihilate. But yeah, later text is very clear that like, yes, there are still Amalekites and like Phoenicians and Canaanites in the territory, right? They still live among them. So that whole thing about like complete and total destruction is war rhetoric. It's not actually what happened. And also, just in context of the time period, a lot of those places would have been evacuated of civilians likely before any conquest would have happened anyway. Let's see. Similarly, the tactics of warfare are described in the Bible, unlike the Quran, in very circumscribed and specific contexts. Moreover, while the Bible clearly condemns certain inhumane practices of paganism, it never invoked an internal war against all of the world's pagan peoples. Interesting how that is the case, right? The Crusades, as a historical phenomenon, were a reaction to events resulting from over 450 years of previous jihad campaigns. At the close of the 11th century, particularly after the crushing Byzantine defeat by the Seljuk Turks at Manzikert in 1071, Christendom, including Europe, was under existential threat by a confluence of Muslim advances. To the west, the Almoravid Berber Muslim tribes drove into Spain and pushed northwards, pillaging and massacring the Christian populations they encountered. In the east, following their victory at, Manzikert, the Seljuks put Armenia to fire and sword, and within a decade, they had conquered 3/4 of Asia Minor by 1090 AD. Grosset has observed, Turkish Islam, having almost entirely driven out the Byzantines out of Asia Minor, was preparing to pass over into Europe from the east. Finally, in the Holy Land, i.e. Palestine itself, the Muslim yoke under the Seljuks had become particularly onerous for the indigenous Christians and Jewish population, as well as Christian pilgrims. Both the native and pilgrim populations were subjected to forced conversions, kidnapping, and murder in an atmosphere of overall insecurity for the life and poverty of non-Muslims. Gee, I wonder why a lot of these people converted under duress, right? Michael the Syrian, the 12th century Jacobite patriarch of Antioch, reproducing earlier contemporary sources in his famous chronicle, summarized the prevailing conditions for the Christians in Palestine as follows. As the Turks were ruling the lands of Syria and Palestine, they inflicted injuries on Christians who went to pray in Jerusalem, beat them, pillaged them, levied the poll tax at the gate of the town, and so also at Golgotha, the place of the skull, and the Holy Sepulchre. And in addition, every time they saw a caravan of Christians, particularly of those from Rome and the lands of Italy, they made every effort to cause their deaths in diverse ways. And when countless people had perished as a result, the kings and counts were seized with religious zeal and left Rome. Troops from all these countries joined them, and they came by sea to Constantinople, First Crusade, 1096 to 1099. So, let's see. I wonder how much history has been lost because of Islam addiction to destroy ancient stuff. That's a good question. Muslims think Allah is a single God and not the angels. I mean, yeah. Let's see. The late Jacques Ellul, I don't know how to say that first name. Jacques Ellul, penetrating analysis of the Jihad, argued convincingly that, in fact, the idea of holy war is a direct product of the Muslim Jihad. If the latter is a holy war, then obviously the fight against Muslims to defend or save Christianity has also to be a holy war. The idea of a holy war is not of Christian origin. Emperors never advanced the idea prior to the appearance of Islam. Ellul's thesis is confirmed when one examines more closely the jihad conquests of the Iberian Peninsula, so that's Spain, Asia Minor, Turkey, and Palestine, as well as the imposition of Muslim rule in these regions, particularly the Iberian Peninsula and in Palestine prior to the onset of the Crusades. Jihad conquests and early Muslim rule on the Iberian Peninsula. So, the Iberian Peninsula was conquered in 710 through 716 AD by Arab tribes originating from northern, central, and southern Arabia. Massive Berber and Arab immigration and the colonization of the Iberian Peninsula followed the conquest. Most churches were converted into mosques, although the conquest had been planned and conducted jointly with a faction of Iberian Christians, dissidents, including a bishop. It proceeded as a classical jihad with massive pillages, enslavement, deportations, and killings. Toledo, which had first submitted to the Arabs in 711 or 712, revolted in 713. So it took, again, 1 to 2 years before they were like, fuck this shit, we gotta revolt. The town was punished by pillage, and all the notables had their throats cut. In 730, Serdang, I don't know how to say that. Serdajne in Septimania near Barcelona. I don't know. I don't speak fucking Moor. Was ravaged and a bishop burned alive. In the regions under stable Islamic control, subjugated non-Muslim dhimmis, Jews and Christians, like elsewhere in other Islamic lands, were prohibited from building new churches or synagogues. So remember, you can't build new churches, you can't build new synagogues. So if you lose your churches and your synagogues, well, you're shit out of luck, right? So, or restoring the old ones, again, right? Segregated in special quarters, they had to wear discriminatory clothing, subjected to heavy taxes. The Christian peasantry formed a servile class exploited by the dominant Arab ruling elites. Many abandoned their lands and fled to the towns. Harsh reprisals with mutilations and crucifixions would sanction the Mozarab, or Christian dhimmis, calls for help from the Christian kings. Moreover, if one dhimmi harmed a Muslim, the whole community would lose its status of protection, leaving it open to pillage, enslavement, and arbitrary killing. So, yeah. Allah equals Elohim, different languages, plural forms. No, in fact, they are not. They are not. They are etymologically linked, but they are definitely not the same character. Let's see. Okay. By the end of the 8th century, the rulers of North Africa and of Andalusia, so Andalus is Spain, by the way, and introduced rigorous Maliki jurisprudence as the predominant school of Muslim law. Thus, as Evariste Levi Provincial, I don't know how to say that name again, observed 3/4 of a century ago, the Muslim Andalusian state thus appears from its earliest origins as the defender and champion of a jealous orthodoxy, more and more ossified in a blind respect for rigid doctrine, suspecting and condemning in advance the least effort of rational speculation. Yeah, it's because Islam is ultimately an anti-rational religion. Right? Again, there's a reason why the Greeks and the Persians were the source of all Muslim learning for the most part. It's because, and again, like even like with the learning of the West, right? It's primarily Greek and it's primarily Greek and Jewish, right? So it's like, yeah, it's like, again, Islam didn't really produce anything. It just steals from things. Let's see. Charles Emmanuel Dufourc, what the fuck is his name, provides these illustrations of the resulting religious and legal discriminations of dhimmis suffered, and the accompanying incentives for them to convert to Islam. Now we get to the part, right? Why would you convert to a religion that does this to you, right? A learned Muslim jurist of Hispanic Christian descent who lived around the year 1000, Ahmed ibn Sa'id ibn Khazam, father of the famous mid-11th century author Ibn Khazam, gives glimpses in several of his juridical consultations of how the freedom of the infidels was constantly at risk. Non-payment of the head tax by a dhimmi made him liable to all the Islamic penalties for debtors who did not pay their creditors. The offender could be sold into slavery or even put to death. In addition, non-payment of the head tax by one or several dhimmis, especially if it was fraudulent, allowed the Muslim authority at its discretion to put an end to the autonomy of the community to which the guilty party or parties belonged. Thus, from one day to the next, all Christians in the city could lose their status as protected people through the fault of just one of them. Everything could be called into question, including their personal liberty. Furthermore, non-payment of the legal tribute was not the only reason for abrogating the status of the people of the book. Another was public outrage against the Islamic faith. For example, leaving exposed for Muslims to see a cross or wine or even pigs. So, yeah, basically they could come up with whatever reason they wanted to decide to fuck with you, right? What a wonderful religion this is, right? Let's see. By converting to Islam, one would no longer have to be confined to a given district or be the victim of discriminatory measures or suffer humiliations. Furthermore, the entire Islamic law tended to favor conversions. When an infidel became a Muslim, he immediately benefited from a complete amnesty for all of his earlier crimes, even if he had been sentenced to the death penalty, even if it was for having insulted the Prophet or blasphemed against the word of God. His conversion acquitted him of all his faults, of all his previous sins. A legal opinion given by a mufti from Al-Andalus in the 19th century is very instructive. A Christian dhimmi kidnapped and violated a Muslim woman. When he was arrested and condemned to death, he immediately converted to Islam. He was automatically pardoned while being constrained to marry the woman and to provide for her a dowry in keeping with her status. The mufti, who was consulted about the affair, perhaps by a brother of the woman, found that the court decision was perfectly legal, but specified that if that convert did not become a Muslim in good faith and secretly remained a Christian, he should be flogged, slaughtered, and crucified. So Muslims destroyed Mesopotamia. Yeah, I can't stand Muslims like that. Well, I hate to tell you this, but these are the real Muslims, right? Not the people who just LARP as one, right? But yes, Muslims did destroy Mesopotamia, but if you're looking for something even close to Islam, the Mesopotamian religion before it was basically like, again, Hellenized, was not dissimilar to this, right? If you read accounts of Assyrian raids, right? I mean Akkadian, not Assyrian. Akkadian raids. They're not so dissimilar from Islam. Now, they didn't wage war against all the world, right? But the kind of things that you'll see the Akkadians got up to is not that dissimilar from what MS-13 does, for example, right? So, Al-Andalus represented the land of jihad par excellence. Every year, or multiple times within a year, a seasonal razzias, or Ghazwa, raiding expeditions were sent to ravage the Christian Spanish kingdoms of the north. The Basque regions, or France and Rhone Valley, bringing back booty and slaves. And Andalusian corsairs attacked and invaded along the Sicilian and Italian coasts, even as far as the Aegean Islands, looting and burning as they went. Many thousands of non-Muslim captives were deported to slavery in Andalusia, where the Caliph kept a militia of 10,000 of... that's a weird way. Oh, tens of thousands of Christian slaves brought from all parts of the Christian Europe, the Sakaliba, and a harem filled with captured Christian women. Bat Yaor summarizes these events as followed. MS-13 lol, right? Well, I mean, again, MS-13 has origins in Satanism, so like unironically, right? The leftist controlled media really did try to cover that up, but nah, MS-13 has its origins actually unironically in theistic Satanism. Let's see. Breaking out of Arabia and from a conquered land, the conquered regions, Mesopotamia, Syria, Palestine, these successive waves of immigrants settled in Spain and terrorized southern France, reaching as far as Avignon. They plundered the Rhone Valley by repeated razzias. In 793 AD, the suburbs of Narbonne were burned down and its outskirts raided. Calls to jihad attracted the fanaticized hordes in the Ribats monastery fortresses, spanning the Islamo-Spanish frontiers. Towns were pillaged and rural areas devastated. In 981, Zamora and the surrounding countryside in the Kingdom of Leon suffered destruction and the deportation of 4,000 prisoners. 4 years later, Barcelona was destroyed by fire and nearly all its inhabitants massacred or taken prisoner. Several years after its conquest in 987, Coimbra remained desolate. Leon was demolished and its countryside ruined. In 997, Santiago and Compostela was pillaged and razed to the ground. 3 years later, Castile was put to fire and sword by Muslim troops, and the population captured in the course of these campaigns, enslaved and deported. The invasions of the Almoravids and Almohads, 11th to 13th century, Berber dynasties from the Maghreb reactivated the Jihad. In French, faire une razzia means raid rapidly and totally. Yeah. Let's see. Society was sharply divided along ethnic and religious lines, with the Arab tribes at the top in the hierarchy, followed by the Berbers, who were never recognized as equals despite their Islamization. Lower in the scale came the Mulawadun converts, and at the very bottom, the Dhimmi Christians and Jews. The Andalusian Maliki jurist Ibn Abdun offered these telling legal opinions regarding Jews and Christians in Seville around 1100 AD. So this is again dated 1134. So no Jew or Christian may be allowed to wear the dress of an aristocrat, nor of a jurist, nor of a wealthy individual. On the contrary, they must be detested and avoided. It is forbidden to greet them with the expression, peace be upon you. In effect, Satan has gained possession of them and caused them to forget God's warning. They are the confederates of Satan's party. Satan's confederates will surely be the losers. Quran 58:19, modern Dawood translation. A distinctive sign must be imposed upon them in order that they may be recognized, and this will be for them a form of disgrace. Right? So, Ibn Abdun also forbade the selling of scientific books to dhimmis under the pretext that they translated them and attributed to them to their co-religionists and bishops. In fact, plagiarism is difficult to prove since whole Jewish and Christian libraries were looted and destroyed. Another prominent Andalusian jurist, Ibn Hams of Cordoba, this is again dated 1064, wrote that Allah has established the infidels' ownership of their property merely to provide booty for Muslims. So, the only reason you have property is so that Muslims can wage war against you and take it. In Granada, the Jewish viziers, Samuel ibn Nagrela and his son Joseph, who protected the Jewish community, were both assassinated between 1056 to 1066, followed by the annihilation of the Jewish population by local Muslims. It is estimated that up to 5,000 Jews perished in the pogrom by Muslims that accompanied the 1066 assassination. This figure equals or exceeds the number of Jews reportedly killed by the Crusaders during their pillage of the Rhineland. Some 30 years later, at the outset of the First Crusade, the Granada pogrom was likely to have been incited in part by the bitter anti-Jewish ode of Abu Ishaq, a well-known Muslim jurist and poet of the times, who wrote, "Bring them down to their place and return them to the most abject station. They used to roam around us in tatters covered with contempt, humiliation, and scorn. They used to rummage amongst the dung heaps for a bit of filthy rags to serve as a shroud for a man to be buried in. Do not consider that killing them is treachery. Nay, it would be treachery to leave them scoffing." The translator then summarizes, "The Jews have broken their covenant, i.e. overstepped their station, with reference to the covenant of Umar, and compunction would be out of place." So, yeah. Make a, yeah, so this is the religion of peace, right? This is the religion of peace. Interesting, right? The Crusades get, shit for their pogroms, but when do we ever hear about, the Muslim world getting shit for its pogrom, right? Oh, wait a minute, it's because it's not actually about objective reality, right? It's, again, that post-colonial thing, right? The Muslims are the ones that are oppressed by the success of the Western nations, and so therefore, they're part of the working class, they're part of the proletariat as well, right? Or at least the proletariat of the post-colonialist. Can you see why this is like so exhausting for me sometimes? The discriminatory policies of the Berber Muslim Almoravids who arrived in Spain in 1086, and subsequently those of the even more fanaticized and violent Almohad Berber Muslims who arrived in Spain in 1146 to 1147, caused the rapid attrition of the pre-Islamic Iberian Christian Mozarab communities, nearly extinguishing them. The Almoravid attitude towards the Mozarabs is well reflected by 3 successive expulsions of the latter to Morocco. In 1106, 1126, and 1138, the oppressed Mozarabs sent emissaries to the King of Aragon, Alfonso I le Batelier. So this is 1104 to 1134. Asking him to come to their rescue and deliver them from the Almoravids following the raid that the King of Aragon launched in Andalusia in 1125 to 1126. In responding to the pleas of Granada's Mozarabs, the latter were deported en masse to Morocco in the fall of 1126. Dozy summarizes the events leading up and surrounding the mass deportations as, let's see, they're pogroms. The Fakiz and the Muslim populace fostered against them, the Mozarabs, and envenomed hatred. In most towns they formed but a small community, but in the province of Granada they were still numerous, and near the capital city they possessed a beautiful church which had been built around 600 AD by Gudila, a Visigoth noble. This church was an offense to the Fakiz. They issued a fatwa decreeing its demolition. Yusuf, he was born Tashfin. God, this is again Star Wars language, right? The Almoravid ruler, having given his approval of the sacred edifice, was leveled with the ground. 1099 AD. Other churches seem to have met with a similar fate, and the Fakiz treated the Mozarabs so oppressively that the latter at length appealed to Alfonso the Battler, King of Aragon, to deliver them from their intolerable burdens. Alfonso acceded to their request. In September 1125, he set out with 4,000 knights and their men at arms. Alfonso did not, however, achieve the results he aimed at. The ultimate object of the expedition had been the capture of Granada, and this was not effected. Upon the withdrawal of the Aragonese army, the Muslims cruelly avenged themselves on the Mozarabs. 10,000 of the Christians were already out of their reach. For knowing the fate in store for them, they had obtained permission from Alfonso to settle in his territories, but many who had remained were deprived of their property, maltreated in endless ways, thrown into prison, or put to death. The majority, however, were transported to Africa and endured terrible sufferings, ultimately settling in the vicinity of Saleh and Mequinez, so that's 1126. This deportation was carried out by virtue of a decree which the Qadi ibn Rushd, grandfather of the famous Averroes. By the way, Averroes is one of the reasons why we actually still have Aristotle in the West. Like, he actually was one of the people who preserved Aristotle. Had procured. 11 years later, a second expulsion took place, and very few were left in Andalusia. Let's see. Star Wars ain't this complicated, right? Yes, Islam. Let's see. So it's only fair that they conquered all the Middle East violently, right? Being victims and stuff. Basically, that's basically the logic. So The Almohads, so 1130 to 1232, wreaked enormous destruction on both the Jewish and Christian populations in Spain and North Africa. This devastation, massacre, captivity, and forced conversion was described by the Jewish chronicler Abraham ibn Daud, then the poet Abraham ibn Ezra. Suspicious of the sincerity of the Jewish converts to Islam, Muslim inquisitors, i.e. Okay, that one was just me with like a burp that I just needed to get up. Okay. What was I? I.e., antedating their Christian Spanish counterparts by 3 centuries, removed the children from such families, placing them in the care of Muslim educators. Maimonides, the renowned philosopher and physician, experienced the Almohad persecutions and had to flee Cordoba with his entire family in 1148, temporarily residing in Fez, disguised as a Muslim, before finding asylum in Fatimid, Egypt. Indeed, although Maimonides is frequently referred to as a paragon of Jewish achievement facilitated by the enlightened rule of Andalusia, his own works debunk this utopian view of Islamic treatment of the Jews. Quote, the Arabs have persecuted us severely and passed baneful and discriminatory legislation against us. Never did a nation molest, degrade, debase, and hate us as much as they did. Interesting, right? It's almost as if this animosity between Islam and, Jews is long-standing, right? Jihad in Asia Minor. The modern historian, okay, so this is definitely a Greek person, Vakalopoulos has summarized the devastation wrought by the Seljuk Jihad conquest of Asia Minor. At the beginning of the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks forced their way into Armenia and there crushed the armies of several petty Armenian states. No fewer than 40,000 souls fled before the organized pillage of the Seljuks, host to the western part of Asia Minor. From the middle of the 11th century, and especially after the Battle of Malazgirt, Manzikert, so that's 1071, the Seljuks spread throughout the whole Asia Minor peninsula, leaving terror, panic, and destruction in their wake. Byzantine and Turkish and other contemporary sources are unanimous in their agreement on the extent of havoc wrought and the protracted anguish of the local population. With the extermination of local populations or their precipitate flight, entire villages, cities, and sometimes whole provinces fell into decay. Other districts were literally transformed into wilderness. Impenetrable thickets sprang up in places where once there had been luxuriant fields and pastures. So, the contemporary primary source narratives of Matthew of Edessa, 12th century, dated after 1136, Samuel Ani, so again dated second half of the 12th century, Anna Komnena, so this is again dated 1153, and an anonymous Georgian chronicler described the Seljuk campaigns, which ravaged Armenia, Anatolia, and Georgia during the 11th and 12th centuries as follows. Let's see. Matthew Edessa. In the beginning of the years 465, so that's 1015 through 16 AD, a calamity proclaiming the fulfillment of divine portents befell the Christian adorers of the Holy Cross. The death-breathing dragon appeared, accompanied by a destroying fire, and struck the believers in the Holy Trinity. The apostolic and prophetic books trembled, for there had arrived winged serpents, coned to vomit fire upon Christ's faithful. I wish to describe in this language the first eruption of ferocious beasts covered with blood. At this period, there gathered the savage nations of infidels called Turks. Setting out, they entered the province of Vesperkan and put the Christians to the sword. Facing the enemy, the Armenians saw these strange men who were armed with bows and had flowing hair like women. So, let's see. During the year 551, the date is wrong and could be 551 or 1062, of the Armenian era, the Turks, under the command of 3 Sultan Tugril, so Beg's generals, called Slar Khorasan. How the fuck am I supposed to say that? Mejmed, so Mejmej, and Isuv. This one didn't literally. Like, the first thing I saw here is like just a series of consonants. I'm like, what the fuck is this? Is this Egyptian? How am I supposed to read this, right? So, and Isluv brought about a torrent of blood on the Christian nation, and they invaded the district of Bagin in the 4th Armenia and sacked it. From there, like a venomous snake, they moved into the adjacent districts of Thelkum and Argni, where they took the Christians by surprise and exterminated them. The massacre began on the 4th of the month of Areg, a Saturday at the 8th hour of the day. There follows a vivid description of massacre that is not translated by Dularir. The translation into English has been made from Dularir's French translation, with omissions reintegrated with in square brackets. So, everywhere throughout the Sicilia, up to Taurus, Marash, and Dilu, the envious reigned agitation and troubled. For populations were precipitated into these regions en masse, coming by the thousands and crowding into them. They were like locusts, covering the surface of the land. They were more numerous, I might add, 7 times more numerous, than the people whom Moses led across the Red Sea, more numerous than the pebbles in the desert of Sinai. The land was inundated by these multitudes of people, illustrious personages, nobles, chiefs, women of position, wandering in begging their bread. Our eyes witnessed the spectacle. So, towards the beginning of the year, 528, so this is 1079 to 80, famine desolated the lands of the worshippers of the cross, already ravaged by the ferocious and sanguinary Turkish hordes. Not one province remained protected from their devastations. Everywhere the Christians had been delivered to the sword or into bondage, interrupting thus the cultivation of fields so that bread was lacking. The farmers and workers had been massacred or led off into slavery, and famine extended its rigors to all places. So basically they did the same thing communists do nowadays, which is like they remove the farmers from the fields and cause mass starvation and death by mass starvation, right? Let's see. Many provinces were depopulated. The Oriental nation Armenians no longer existed, and the land of the Greeks was in ruins. Nowhere was one able to procure bread. So you don't even get bread lines in here, right? So, Samuel of Ani, the taking of Ani by Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan. This is 1064. In 531 of the Armenian era, so that's 1064, at the time of the Festival of the Virgin, on a Monday, the town of Ani was taken by the Sultan Alp Arslan. This is 1063 through 73. Who massacred its inhabitants, apart from the women and children who he led into captivity. So this is Anna Komnena. And since the succession of Diogenes, the barbarians tread upon the boundaries of the empire of Romaioi. The barbarian hand was not restricted until the reign of my father. Swords and spears were whetted against the Christians, and also battles and wars and massacres. Cities were obliterated, lands were plundered, and the whole land of Romaioi was stained by blood of Christians. Some fell piteously, the victims of arrows and spears. Others, being driven away from their homes, were carried off captive to the cities of Persia. Terror reigned over all they hastened to hide in the caves, forests, mountains, and hills. Among them cried aloud in horror at those things which they suffered, being led off to Persia. And others who yet survive, if some did remain within the Romaic boundaries, lamenting, cried the one for his son, the other for his daughter. One bewailed his brother, another his cousin who had died previously, and like women shed hot tears. And there was at that time not one relationship which was without tears and without sadness. I hate Mondays. So Georgian chronicler. The emirs spread out like locusts over the face of the land. The countries of Assis, Pornia, let's see, Clargeth, up to the shores of the sea. What the okay. I should have maybe learned Georgian, right? Chalcheth, Adchara, this Georgian isn't a real language. Karthli, Argoth, let's see, Samo Kalako, and what the fuck am I supposed to do with this? Ditchkondid were filled with Turks who pillaged and enslaved all the inhabitants. In a single day, the burned Kuthathis, Artanuj, and hermitages of Clargeth, and they remained in these lands until the first snow, devouring the land, massacring all those who had fled into the forests, to the rocks, and the caves. The calamities of Christianity did not come to an end soon thereafter. For the approaching of spring, the Turks returned to carry out the same ravages and left again in the winter. The inhabitants, however, were unable to plant or harvest. The land, thus delivered to slavery, had only animals of the forest and wild beasts for inhabitants. Karthli was in the grip of intolerable calamities such as one cannot compare to a single devastation or combination of evils of past times. The holy churches served as stables for their horses. The sanctuaries of the Lord served as repairs for the abominations, Islam. Some of the priests were immolated during the Holy Communion itself. Now you have to remember that, like, the Holy Communion is actually kind of important here because the Catholic and Eastern Orthodox tradition is that the bread and wine become the literal body and blood of Christ under the appearance of bread and wine, right? And because of that, the body and the bread and the wine, every particle of the bread and the wine, contain the fullness of Christ's divinity and humanity, right? The full, like, Christ himself is the bread and the wine here, right? So yes, this is also the Muslims from a Catholic and an Orthodox perspective. And by Orthodox, I also mean like Eastern and Oriental Orthodox, by the way, right? And even some Protestant orientations, like, again, when a Lutheran says, is means is, right? Lutherans also believe that the bread and the wine are literally the body and blood of Christ, right? So, yeah, this is an act of supreme sacrilege, right? To immolate during a man during Holy Communion itself, right? Let's see. And others were carried off into harsh slavery without regard to their old age. The virgins were defiled, the youths circumcised. So basically, I'm pretty sure the circumcision here means means castration, because the Muslims would castrate their slaves, right? And the infants taken away. The conflagration, well, it could have also just been circumcision too. The conflagration, expending its ravages, consumed all of the inhabited sites. The rivers, instead of water, flowed blood. I shall apply the sad words of Jeremiah, which he applied so well to such situations. The honorable children of Zion, never put to the test by misfortunes, now voyaged as slaves on foreign roads. The streets of Zion now wept because there was no one left to celebrate the feasts. The tender mothers, in place of preparing with their hands the nourishment of sons, were themselves nourished from the corpses of these dearly loved. Such and worse was the situation at the time. And Isaiah said, "Your land is devastated, your cities reduced to ash, and foreigners have devoured your provinces, which are sacked and ruined by barbarian nations." J.B. Segal reviewed the destruction of the Christian enclave in Edessa in 1144 to 1146 AD during the Crusades, using primarily source documentation. 30,000 souls were killed. Women, youths, and children to the number of 16,000 were carried into slavery, stripped of their clothes, barefoot, their hands bound, forced to run beside their captors on horses. Those who could not endure were pierced by lances or arrows, or abandoned to wild animals and birds of prey. Priests were killed out of hand or captured, few escaped. The archbishop of the Armenians was sold at Aleppo. The whole city was given over to looting for a whole year, resulting in complete ruin. From this disaster, the Christian community of Edessa never recovered. So let's see. Philip says, I'm no better, too many consonants to enunciate. Yes. Well, Georgian is kind of notorious for its consonant clusters, so I'm not exactly surprised. I had no fucking idea how to pronounce any of those Georgian names, right? I know Kartli was like, is I think the like fucking Georgian name for Georgian, but it's like, how am I supposed to pronounce this, right? I've never seen a Sanskrit word with this many consonants in this with this consonant combination. How am I supposed to approximate this? All right, so we're almost to the end of this video, not video, but this article, and then I'll go get myself a drink of water and like come back to read the second article. Finally, these two devastating jihad attacks, 1144 and 1164, 46, not 64, on Edessa by the Seljuk Turks, which included the mass murder of non-combatants, were depicted in a graphic contemporary account by Michael the Syrian as follows. Just gargle adding the K sound, right? Well, I mean, so for a lot of the like the Arab sounds, the K sound is made with the uvula, not with like the soft palate, like what we do. It's like a sound. But yeah, I'm not doing that right now. Right? This article is fucking long. I'm not gonna read trying to pronounce everything faithful to its original source language, right? The Turks entered with their swords and blades drawn, drinking the blood of the old and young, the men and women, the priests and the deacons, the hermits and the monks, the nuns, the virgins, the infants at the breast, the betrothed men and women to whom they were betrothed. Ah, what a bitter tale! The city of Abgar, the friend of Christ, was trampled underfoot because of our iniquity. The priests were massacred, the deacons immolated, the subdeacons crushed, the temples pillaged, the altars overturned. Alas, what a calamity. Fathers denied their children. The mothers forgot her affection for her little ones. While the sword was devouring and everyone was fleeing to the mountaintop, some gathered their children like a hen her chicks and waited to die together by the sword or else be led off together into captivity. Some aged priests who were carrying the relics of the martyrs, seeing this raging destruction, recited the word of the prophet, I will endure the Lord's wrath because I have sinned against him and angered him. And they did not take flight, nor did they cease praying until the sword rendered them mute. And they were found at the same spot, their blood spilled all over the ground, spilled all around them. So they were orcs. Yeah, basically, right? Yeah. You're not wrong about that, right? Let's see. The Turks descended from the citadel upon those who had remained in the churches or in our other places, whether because of old age or as a result of some other infirmity, and they tortured them, showing no pity. Those who had escaped from being suffocated or trampled in the crush and had left the city with the Franks were surrounded by the Turks, who rained down upon them a hail of arrows, which cruelly pierced them through. O cloud of wrath and day without mercy, in which the scourge of violent wrath once again struck the unfortunate Edessanians. O night of death, morning of hell, day of perdition, which arose against the citizens of that excellent city. Alas, my brethren, who could recount or hear without tears how the mother and the infant that she carried in her arms were pierced through by the same arrow, without anyone to lift them up or to remove the arrow. And soon as they lay in that state, the hooves of the horses of those who were pursuing them pounded them furiously. That whole night they had been pierced by arrows, and at daybreak, which was for them even darker, they were struck by the swords and the lances. And when the earth shivered with horror at the massacre that took place, like the sickle on the stalks of grain, or like fire among wood chips, the sword carried off the Christians. The corpses of priests, deacons, monks, noblemen, and the poor were abandoned pell-mell. Yet, although their death was cruel, they nevertheless did not have as much to suffer as those who remained alive. For when the latter fell in the midst of the fire and the wrath of the Turks, those barbarians stripped them of their clothing and their footwear, striking them with rods. They forced them, men and women, naked and with their hands tied to behind their backs, to run with the horses. Those perverts pierced the belly of anyone who grew faint and fell to the ground and left him to die along the road, and those they became the prey of wild beasts, and then they expired, or else the food of birds of prey, in which case they were tortured. The air was poisoned with the stench of corpses. Assyria was filled with captives. Part 2, including endnotes, can be read here. All right, so I will be right back. I'm going to go get myself some water. All right, so second part of this. I'm so upset that it took me so long to get this stupid OBS up, because I could have done this and something else at the end of this. But anyway, let's go. So, Jihad begat the Crusades 2. There's another one by the American thinker I'm going to have to find. It's an actual timeline of the Crusade, like the Jihad before the Crusades. But I'm going to have to use the Wayback Machine to find that one too. So, let us continue. Jihad conquests an early Muslim rule in Syria and Syrio-Palestine. Oh, I drank a little bit too much water too fast. Again, means between extremes, right? Let's see. Moshe Gil, in his seminal analysis, A History of Palestine, 634 through 1099, emphasizes the singular centrality that Palestine occupied in the mind of its pre-Islamic Jewish inhabitants, who referred to the land as Al-Sham. Indeed, as Gill observes, the sizable Jewish population in Palestine, who formed a majority of its inhabitants when grouped with the Samaritans at the dawn of the Arab-Muslim conquests, were the direct descendants of the generations of Jews who had lived there since the days of Joshua bin Nun. In other words, for some 2,000 years. He also explodes the ahistorical thesis of scholars who perceive an ethnic motivation behind the Jihad conquests. They see Arabs everywhere, even in the Canaanites and the Philistines were Arabs, according to their theories. This applies to an even greater degree to the population of Palestine and Syria in the 7th century, who were certainly Semites. Thus, according to their claims, the conquering Arab forces in the course of their battles actually encountered their own people, or at least members of their own race who spoke the same language. This is, of course, a very distorted view. Semitism is not a race and only relates to a sphere of language. The populations met along the route of battle, living in cities or on the countryside, were not Arabs and did not speak Arabic. We do know the Bedouin tribes at that time who inhabited the borderlands and the southern parts of Palestine, west of the Euphrates, or Hira, in the Syrian desert, Palmyra, and elsewhere, but the cultivated inner regions of the cities were inhabited by Jews and Christians who spoke Aramaic. They did not sense any special ties to the Bedouin. If anything, it was the contrary. Their proximity and the danger of an invasion from that quarter disturbed their peace of mind, and this is amply reflected both in the writings of the Church Fathers and the Talmudic sources. Gill concludes that the views of the Jihad conquest of Palestine expressed in the sources from the vanquished in indigenous non-Muslim populations reflect the attitude of the towns and villages in Palestine quite accurately. The attitude of, a sedentary population of farmers and craftsmen towards nomads whose source of income is the camel and who frequently attack the towns, pillage and slaughter the inhabitants, and endanger the lives of the wayfarer. These sources completely contradict the argument, to the effect that the villagers and the townsmen in Palestine accepted the invasion of those tribes bearing the banner of Islam with open arms of their so-called racial affinity. Batye summarizes the Arab-Muslim conquest of Palestine as follows. Hold on. Before I get to this part, chat is talking. You will be surprised by what you can heal if you start fasting a day or two every week while hydrating in a pinch of sea salt to every cup of water. Remember to bless it with good vibes. Fair. Let's see. Abu Bakr. You just had to get me to say fair, eh? Let's see. Abu Bakr organized the invasion of Syria, Syrio-Palestine, which Muhammad had already envisaged. He gathered tribes from the Hijaz, Najd, and Yemen, and advised Abu Ubayyad, in charge of operations in the Golan, to plunder the countryside, but due to a lack of adequate weaponry, to refrain from attacking towns. Consequently, the whole Gaza region up to Caesarea was sacked and devastated in the campaign of 634. 4,000 Jewish, Christian, and Samaritan peasants who defended their land were massacred. So again, Jews, Samaritans, and Christians, right? Let's see. The villages of the Negev were pillaged by Amr bin al-As, while the Arabs born al-As. While the Arabs overran the countryside, cut communications, and made roads perilous. Towns such as Jerusalem, Gaza, Jaffa, Caesarea, Nablus, and Beth Shean, or Sayan, were isolated and closed their gates. In his sermon on Christmas Day 634, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Sophronius, lamented over the impossibility of going on a pilgrimage to Bethlehem, as was the custom, because the Christians were being forcibly kept in Jerusalem, not detained by tangible bonds, but chained and nailed by fear of the Caesareans, whose savage, barbarous, and bloody sword kept them locked up in the town. Destruction of the churches and monasteries, the sacked towns, the field laid waste, the villages burned down by nomads who were overrunning the country. In a letter the same year to Sergius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, he mentions the ravages wrought by the Arabs. Thousands of people perished in 639, victims of the famine and plague that resulted from these destructions. The countryside in Syrio-Palestine, Iraq, Persia, and Armenia suffered constant razzias, while those who escaped the sword swelled the contingents of enslaved women and children shared out among the soldiers after the destruction of the fifth share of booty reserved for the caliph. Let's see. If it wouldn't have ramifications that would likely lead to myself not existing, I would wish I could travel back in time with a tank and a few miniguns to fight against them, right? Turns out it's like fucking like Dragon Ball logic. It's like, oh yeah, you're not actually changing your timeline, you're changing someone else's timeline. It's like, well, we shall crusade, right? Let's see. According to the Muslim chronicler Balad Huri, so this is died 892. Let's see. 40,000 Jews lived in Caesarea alone at the Arab conquest, after which all trace of them is lost. 40,000 Jews just disappeared in the ether, as they sometimes do, right? Right? The 10th century Jacobite chronicler Michael the Syrian wrote that the ongoing Arab razzias and expeditions in Syrio-Palestine, as well as Iraq, Persia, and Armenia, were characterized by repeated and systematic pillage. The Tayyaye Arabs grew rich, increased, and overran the lands which they took from the Romans, or Byzantines, and which were given over to pillage. In following the surrender of the city of Damascus, he notes, Umar, born al-Khattab, sent Khalid, born Walid, with an army to the Aleppo and Antioch region. There they murdered a large number of people. No one escaped them. Whatever may be said of the evils that Syria suffered, they cannot be recounted because of their great number. For the Yahyaye Arabs were the great rod of God's wrath. Gill further elaborates on the initial wave of Jihad conquests and details the lasting destruction they wrought. Ooh, this one's a bit lengthy. Let's see. I'm going to section this off. At the time of the conquest, Palestine was inhabited by Jews and Christians. The Arab tribes were to be found in the border areas. In keeping with arrangements made with the Byzantine rulers, one can assume that the local population suffered immensely during the course of the war, i.e. Jihad conquests, and it is very likely that many villages were destroyed and uprooted in the frontier regions, that the lot of these local populations was very bitter indeed. It appears that the period of the conquest was also that of the destruction of the synagogues and churches of the Byzantine era, remnants of which have been unearthed in our time and are still being discovered. The assumption is based both on what is said in a few Christian sources and on Muslim sources describing Umar's, or so Umar born al-Khattab, visits to al-Sham. There is no doubt that one of the main purposes of these visits was to establish order and put an end to the devastation and slaughter of the local population. Towns in the western strip and the central strip, regions of the red sand hills and the swamps in Sharon, decreased from 58 to 17. So let's see. It is estimated that the erosion of the soil from the western slopes of the Judean mountains reached, as a result of the agricultural uprooting during the Muslim period, the gigantic extent of 2,000 to 4,000 cubic meters. We find direct evidence of the destruction of agriculture and the desertion of the villages in the fact that the papyri of Nisana are completely discontinued after the year 700. One can assume that at the time the inhabitants abandoned the place, evidently because of the intertribal warfare among the Arabs, which completely undermined the internal security of the area. An archaeological analysis of Naphtali Lewis emphasizes that the distress of the inhabitants was exasperated after the 700. Conditions became unbearable due to the general political situation, and worsening attitudes towards the dhimmis rendered Negev a wasteland. Okay, let's go here. This seems to be the whole quote. Let's see. It was precisely at this period in the caliphate of Abd al-Malik and his sons, so this is 685 to 743, the Arab state embarked on a new nationalistic policy. The official records of Islam began to be kept in Arabic, and non-Arabs began to be eliminated from government services. With this Arabization of rule came increasing fiscal burdens for the Christians, burdens which they could now no longer escape by conversion to Islam. This may well have been rendered life impossible may have rendered life impossible for the villagers of Negev, who had already before had occasion to complain of fiscal oppression. In the period of their prosperity, the production of Negev villages was supplemented by financial assistance from the Byzantine emperors in the form of stipends and emoluments paid the military settlers. In the first half-century of Arab rule, which terminated this positive support but otherwise changed conditions little, life could apparently still be sustained, and where life is even barely bearable, people are generally reluctant to leave their homes. But when the government changed its policy and began to make conditions as a result become increasingly difficult, life in the southern desert became impossible and the Negev villages disappeared. Growing Arab strength drove the Negev inhabitants. The weakness of central authority in the area would result from the growing depopulation and relapse into nomadism. So, finally, Gill has translated these observations by the 10th century Karaite, so Karaite is like non-rabbinic, commenter Yafet born Ali expressed awareness of the fact that there was great destruction in Palestine and that there were places which remained uninhabited, while there were other places to which people returned and settled. The places which were completely destroyed so that no memory of them remains, like Samaria and the second, are the places which have been destroyed and ruined, but despite this there are guards and people living there, such as Hebron and others. Alright, that was fucking huge. This sounds familiar? Yes, right? It's kind of interesting how, again, things change and they somehow stay the same, right? It's almost as if this is a historical pattern that keeps repeating itself, right? Let's see. Gill also captures the stark, unromantic reality of Muslim-ruled Palestine during this era, which included the initial jihad conquest and establishment of Arab Muslim rule from 634 to 661, Umayyad Damascene rule from 661 to 750, Abbasid Baghdadian rule from 750 through 878, Turco-Egyptian rule, so this is the Tulunids, and Ikhshidids from 878 until 970, interrupted by the Abbasid Baghdadian rule between 905 and 930. Nearly 2 generations of war, including numerous participants, the dominant party being the Fatimids from 970 through 1030. Just over 40 years of Fatimid Egyptian rule between 1030 and 1071, and a generation of Seljuk Turkish or Turkoman rule encompassing most of the Palestine from 1071 until 1099. Dramatic persecution directed specifically at Christians, included execution for refusing to apostatize to Islam. During the first 2 decades of the 8th century, under regions of Abd al-Malik, his son Suleiman, and Umar born Abd al-Aziz, Georgian, Greek, Syriac, and Armenian sources report both prominent individuals and groups executions. For example, 63 out of 70 Christian pilgrims from Iconium in Asia Minor were executed by the Arab governor of Caesarea, barring 7 who apostatized to Islam, and 60 Christian pilgrims from Amorion were crucified in Jerusalem. The Abbasids moved to the capital from Damascus, seat of the Umayyad Empire, to Baghdad, absorbed much of the Syrian and Persian culture as well as Persian methods of governance, and ushered in putative golden age. Gill and Battier offered revealing assessments of this golden age, dimitude and its adverse impact on the conquered indigenous Jews and Christians of Palestine under the early Abbasid rule, approximately 750 to 755 AD, perhaps during the reign of Abul Abbas Abdullah al-Safa. Greek sources report orders demanding the removal of crosses over churches, bans on church services, and teaching of the scriptures, the eviction of monks from their monasteries, and excessive taxation. Gill notes that in 772, when Caliph al-Mansur visited Jerusalem, he ordered a special mark should be stamped on the hands of Christians and the Jews. Many Christians fled to Byzantium. The following decade witnessed persistent acts of persecution as well. These details are provided by Gill. One source tells of a Muslim who converted to Christianity and became a monk and renamed Christophorus. So this would mean like Christ bearer, right? If I remember correctly. He was beheaded on 14th of April 789. At around the same time, evidently, there was an Arab attack on the monastery of St. Theodosius near Bethlehem. The monastery was pillaged, many of the monks were slaughtered, and some escaped. The attackers also destroyed 2 churches near the monastery. A church source tells about the suffering endured by the monasteries in the Judean mountains during the intertribal warfare, which broke out in 796. While Bet Guvrin was being abandoned by its inhabitants, who were falling captive to the Arabs, assaults were being made in Ascalon, Gaza, and other localities. Everywhere there was pillage and destruction. I am filled with rage, with new knowledge that schools are chanting lmao from the ABC song to OPQRSTU space WXYZ. Want to find the person responsible, and then knock their teeth in. Yeah, I've heard something about the alphabet song, and I'm like, I don't know anything about this. But if I had kids, I probably wouldn't be sending them to public school anyway. So, like, oh my goodness. Let's see. Batye or elucidates. I had to get back into gear for a moment. Batye elucidates the fiscal oppression inherent in 8th century Palestine, which devastated the dhimmi Jewish and Christian peasantry, overtaxed and tortured by tax collectors and villagers, fled into hiding or emigrated to towns. She quotes from the detailed chronicle of an 8th century monk, completed in 774. The men scattered, they became wanderers everywhere, the fields were laid waste, the countryside pillaged, the people went from one land to the other. Let's see. Greek chronicler Theophanes. So Theophanes. Theophanes is basically the original version of the word of the name Tiffany. Funny enough, right? As summarized by Gill, provides the contemporary description of the chaotic events which transpired after the death of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid in 809. And ensuring fratricidal war which erupted between brothers Al-Amin and Al-Mamun. According to him, Theophanes, these events caused the Christians an enormous amount of suffering. Many churches and monasteries in Jerusalem and its environs were abandoned, such as those of Saints Sirach, Theodosius, Cheriton, Euthemius, and Mar Saba. 4 years later, in 813, the disturbances broke out anew, and many Christians, both monks and laity, fled from Palestine to Cyprus and Constantinople, where they found refuge from the Arabs. Terrible persecution. In those days of anarchy and civil war, Palestine was the scene of violence, rape, and murder. Perhaps the clearest outward manifestation of this of the inferiority and humiliation of the dhimmis were the prohibitions regarding the their dress codes and the demands that distinguishing signs be placed on the entrances of dhimmi houses. During the Abbasid caliphates of Harun al-Rashid, so this is 786 to 809, and al-Mutawakkil, so that's 847 to 861. Jews and Christians were required to wear yellow as patches attached to their garments or hats. Later, to differentiate them from between Christians and Jews, the Christians were required to wear blue. At 850, consistent with Quranic verses associating them with Satan and hell, the al-Mutawakkil decreed that Jews and Christians attach wooden images of devils to the doors of their homes to distinguish them from the homes of Muslims. But Bat Ye'or summarizes the oppression of the dhimmis throughout the Abbasid Empire under al-Mutawakkil as a wave of religious persecution, forced conversions, and the elimination of churches and synagogues. Let's see. Oh, by the way, hello, Phantom Crustacean. I didn't realize that it did not register to me that you've not been in this chat for right now. For this stream. So hello, Phantom Crustacean. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I've been absorbed in this article. Let's see. Paroxysms of violent persecution erupted yet again in October to November of 923. According to the Patriarch of Alexandria, Said, born Bitrik, as well as two Muslim chroniclers, summarized by Gill. The Muslims attacked in Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, so that's 26th of March, 937, and set fire to the southern gates of Constantine's church and to half of the exedra, whereupon the Church of the Cavalry and Church of the Resurrection collapsed. According to Al-Makin and Al-Makrizi, the Church of the Resurrection and the Church of the Cavalry were also robbed of their treasures. Robed? What the fuck am I doing? It seems at the same time the Muslims attacked in Ascalon again. According to Yahya, born Said, the assault was made on the great church there, known by the name of Mary the Green. They destroyed it and robbed it of all its contents, and then set it set fire to it. The bishop of Ascalon then left for Baghdad to get permission to rebuild the church, but he did not succeed. The church was left in ruins, for the Muslims who lived in Ascalon agreed amongst themselves that they would not allow it to be rebuilt to be built again. As to the bishop, he never returned to Ascalon and remained in Ramla until his death. So in the 1930s, special Germans didn't invent anything new with the armband. Well, I mean, fucking Funny Mustache Man did have positive things to say about Islam, right? He was allied to Muslim nations at the time, and you'll notice that a lot of the people, praising the guy nowadays online, a lot of them are like Pakistani and Arab and other Muslim nations. Might be something there, right? For one pagan ruler, supported by another pagan ruler, right? I still refuse to acquiesce to the idea that like Islam is an Abrahamic religion. I still think the idea that it's like no, this is a novel Arab monotheism that like it took from Arabic religions, but is very clearly not an Arabic religion itself, is a more plausible and defendable position. But I digress. Let's see. During the early 11th century period of Al-Hakim's reign, religious assaults and hostility intensified. As Gill notes, the destruction of the churches at the Holy Sepulchre, so this is 1009, marked the beginning of a whole series of acts of oppression against the Christian population, which, according to reliable sources, extended the coercion to convert to Islam. Yahya born Said's description of the event surrounding the destruction of the churches of the Holy Sepulchre is summarized by Gill. They dismantled the Church of the Resurrection to its very foundations. Apart from what could not be destroyed or pulled up, they also destroyed the Golgotha and the Church of Saint Constantine and all that they contained, as well as the sacred gravestones. They even tried to dig up the graves and wipe out all the traces of their existence. Indeed, they broke and uprooted most of them. They also laid waste to a convent in the neighborhood. The authorities took all the other property belonging to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and its pious foundations and all its furnishings and treasures. Citing both Muslim al-Qudai ibn Khalikan and Ibn al-Athir and non-Muslim Bar Hebrius sources, Gill also describes the edicts of Al-Hakim imposed on the Christians and Jews beginning in August 1011. Let's see. They were ordered to wear black turbans. The Christians had to wear a cross the length of a cubit, that's huge, and weighing 5 rattles around their necks. Let's see. The Jews were obliged to wear a block of wood of similar weight. They had to wear some distinguishing mark in the bathhouses. And finally, Al-Hakim decided that there were to be separate bathhouses for their use. Ibn al-Athir conveys that Al-Hakim ordered, after the destruction of the Church of the Resurrection in Jerusalem, that all the churches in the realm be destroyed. And this was done, and the Jews and Christians were then to accept Islam or immigrate to Byzantine lands. They were also obliged to wear special distinguishing signs. Many converted. Bar Hebrius speaks of thousands of churches which were destroyed in the Fatimid kingdom at the time. The decree regarding the wearing of the cross around the neck was also, he says, a means of pressuring the Christians to convert. The wooden block the Jews were obliged to wear had been in the shape of a calf as a reminder of the golden calf. So, again, as I keep telling you, right? It's like, yes, it's all about humiliating. It's the reason why the jizya is a thing, right? It's to humiliate someone and completely demoralize them. And here we see that exact thing too, right? Why do they treat the dhimmi this way? It's to humiliate, just demoralize, and then eventually, hopefully, get someone on their side, or if not, still make yourself seem like the big guy for, bullying people who can't defend themselves. Let's see. In a separate focused analysis of the conditions of the dhimmis of Jerusalem, Gill concludes that during the early through mid 11th century, the Jews suffered both economically and physically. Yeah, I want to see how long this quote is. Okay. Economic conditions in Jerusalem were rather harsh, and the yeshiva often issued urgent appeals for aid. Besides, there were frequent acts of oppression on the part of the Muslim authorities. Very often, special heavy taxes were imposed, which aggravated the already precarious situation of both the yeshiva and the Jewish population of Jerusalem. It must be remembered that taxation in Jerusalem was probably different from that found in other parts of the Muslim world. It seems that Jews were there had to pay a comprehensive lump sum for the whole Jewish population of the city, regardless of its numbers. When the population decreased as a result of wars and Bedouin upheavals, the burden on each individual became heavier. In such situations, the yeshiva was forced to borrow money against heavy interest from wealthy Muslims. When the time of repayment arrived, Jewish notables were in danger of being imprisoned, as the yeshiva was not in a position to accumulate the funds it had to return. In some cases, people were actually incarcerated, and it took a great deal of effort to collect the funds necessary for their release. An example is the letter written by Abraham and son and main assistant of Solomon, born Yehuda, head of the yeshiva, to the sons of Mevasser, a family of Parnasim of Fustat, asking them to help keep their promise to send the aid in time to pay the Karach. Okay. Good Lord, man. Caesar's Legion, right? Let's see. Muslim Turkoman rule of Palestine for the nearly 3 decades just prior to the Crusades, so that's 1071 to 1099. Was characterized by such unrelenting warfare and devastation that imminent end of days atmosphere was engendered. For example, Gill describes one Tiz, born Awak, Awak's Jihad campaign in Syro-Palestine around 1077. Then Astiz advanced on Jerusalem from Damascus, placed the city under siege, and promised its inhabitants the Aman. On this basis, the inhabitants opened the gates of the city to him. Astiz prevailed over Jerusalem, completely ignoring his promise of Aman, and went on a rampage. He slaughtered 3,000 people there. Again, there's a historical pattern of Muslims getting a treaty or getting an agreement and then immediately reneging on it as soon as they get into a position of power, right? Let's see. He also conducted campaigns of annihilation against Ramla until all its people had fled, and against Gaza, where he murdered the entire population. He likewise massacred people in Al-Arish and elsewhere, and wrought endless havoc in Damascus, where only 3,000 of the original 500,000 inhabitants had remained, due to starvation and scarcity. Jaffa too was attacked, and its governor fled from the town to Tyre, together with all the city's inhabitants, while the walls of Jaffa were destroyed on Astiz's orders. A contemporary Russian chronicle cited by Gill indicates that the Turkomans destroyed and desolated the cities and villages from Antioch to Jerusalem. They murdered, took captive, pillaged, set on fire. They destroyed churches and monasteries. Okay. Let's see here. Gill notes that these observations are confirmed by Geniza documents describing how the Turkoman occupation denoted terrible calamities, such as taking captives of the people of Ramla, the cutting off of roads, the obduracy of the commander, the aura and anxiety of panic, and so on. He continues, "We do not know of what Atziz's attitude was to the Jewish population in 1078 during the cruel suppression of the uprisings and the destruction of towns. But the fact that from this date onwards we barely find letters from Palestine, apart from Ascalon and Caesarea, the Geniza documents speak for itself. The contemporary poem by Solomon HaKohen, born Joseph, believed to be a descendant from the Geonim, an illustrious family of Palestinian Jewish religious leaders, speaks of destruction and ruin, the burning of harvests, the razing of plantations, the desecration of cemeteries, the act of violence and slaughter and plunder. Okay. Let's see. There were a strange and cruel people. Son of a bitch. They were strange and cruel people, grit with garments of many colors, armed and officered, chiefs among the terrible ones, and capped with helmets, black and red, with bow and spear, and full quivers, and they trumpet like elephants, and roar as the roaring ocean, to terrify, to frighten those who oppose them. And they are wicked men and sinners, madmen, not sane. They laid waste to cities. They were made desolate, and they rejoiced in their hearts, hoping to inherit. He, God, also remembered what they had done to the people of Jerusalem, that they had besieged them twice in 2 years, and burned the heaped corn, and destroyed the places, and cut down the trees, and trampled upon the vineyards, and surrounded the city upon the high mountains, and despoiled the graves, and threw out the bones, and built palaces to protect themselves against the heat, and erected an altar to slay upon it the abominations. And the men and the women ride upon the walls, crying unto the God of gods, to quiet the great anger, standing the whole night, banishing sleep, while the enemy destroys evening and morning, and break down the whole earth, and lay bare the ground, and stand on the highways, intending to slay like Cain, and cut off the ear, and also the nose, and rob the garments, leaving them to stand naked, also roar like lions, and roar like young lions. They do not resemble men. They are like beasts, and are harlots and adulterers. They inflame themselves with males. They are bad and wicked and spiteful as sodomites. They impoverished the sons of nobles, and starved the delicately bred. And all the people of the city went out and cried in the field, and covered their lips, silent in their pains, and they had no mercy on widows, and pitied not the orphans. Let's see. Gill concludes that as a result, the Turkoman Jihad, Palestine, was drawn into a whirlpool of anarchy and insecurity, of internal wars among the Turks themselves, and between them, generally in collaboration with the Arab tribes, the Fatimids. Here and there, in one or another area, a delicate state of balance was arrived at for a few years, and by and large, however, the Turkoman period, which lasted less than 30 years, was one of slaughter and vandalism, of economic hardship and the uprooting of populations. Terrible suffering, evictions, and wandering was the particular lot of the Jewish population, and chiefly its leadership, the Palestinian yeshiva. Gill offers this sobering overall assessment of his extensive, copiously documented analysis of the initial period of Muslim rule of Palestine from 634 to 1099 AD. Maybe I'd take a few portable suns with me on the trip to the past as well, right? Yeah. I mean, we're almost done with this, so again, did anyone here think the Crusades were not justified after reading all this? Right? If anything, I think that they would have been justified significantly earlier if it was possible, right? It was a ridiculous amount of patience that Christendom seemed to have had about this, right? Which, talking about a ridiculous amount of patience, reminding you of anything right now? Once again, as Kirsha says, time is a flat circle, right? Alrighty then. These facts do not call for much interpretation. Together they simply form a picture of almost unceasing insecurity, of endless rebellion and wars, of upheavals and instability. And I would say something. As much as everyone keeps mentioning anarchy in this, I have not seen a single instance of anarchism. I've seen a massive, every single time they mention something, it's not anarchy. It's a state causing this problem, right? A Muslim state, a Muslim religion, right? So again, using anarchy as a term to describe what a government is doing to another people is kind of insane, right? Let's see. Nah, this justifies having another crusade to finish the damn job. Kind of based, not gonna lie, right? Oh my god! So someone like I got one of those like political hey, do you have a time to talk politics, right, on the phone that you sometimes get? And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? I don't think the person on the other end was nearly expecting to like. He didn't expect someone like for me to actually know as much about the situation as they wanted to talk about, because they wanted to talk about stuff like security and Iran and all that stuff, right? I just pointed out, it's like, look, man, if you're not gonna if we're not gonna address Islam, right, if we're not gonna actually like fund counter propaganda from atheists, like again, like what Apostate Prophet once was, or Christians like Michael Jones and David Wood, or literally anyone else, right? Anyone who's like just to collapse Islam globally, you're going to have a bit of an issue, right? Because you're not going to stop this. It has never stopped. It has only ever entered peace, moments of temporary peace, while again the procedure for starting up again has been considered behind the scenes. So all right then. So the brutal nature of the Crusaders' conquest of Palestine, particularly the major cities beginning in 1098 to 1099, has been copiously documented. However, the devastation wrought by both Crusader conquest and rule through the last decades of the 13th century cannot be reasonably claimed to have been to have approached, let alone somehow exceeded, what transpired during the first four and one half centuries of Muslim jihad conquests. Endless internecine struggles for Muslim dominance and imposition of dimitude, as Emmanuel Sivan has observed regarding Crusader domination. Practical considerations appear to have outweighed religious fanaticism, and when it came to the peasantry, the infidel children of the devil in the villages were spared. It was clear to the Crusaders that they were themselves too few to dispense with the labor of local farmers in cultivating the soil. So, moreover, we cannot ignore the testimonies of Isaac, born Samuel of Acre, so that's 1270 to 1350, one of the most outstanding Kabbalists of his time, so we're talking like mystic here, conversant with Islamic theology and often using Arabic in his exegesis. Isaac nevertheless believed that it was preferable to live under the yoke of Christendom rather than of Islamdom. Acre was taken from the Crusaders by the Mamluks in 1291 in a very brutal jihad conquest described in Runshiman. And by the way, again, that's why I said, again, there's not a single Jewish consensus on this stuff, because yes, there were Jews that helped with the Muslim, takeovers. There were also Jews who were very clear, it's better to live under Christendom than the Muslim rule, right? So again, this is one of those things where it's like, again, everyone wants to oversimplify this subject matter. It's not a simple subject matter. Let's see. Soon, okay, let's go all the way down to the bottom of this quote. Soon the Muslim soldiers penetrated right through the city, slaying everyone, old men, women, and children alike. A few lucky citizens who stayed in their houses were taken alive and sold as slaves, but not many were spared. No one could tell the number of those that perished. Some prisoners were freed and returned to Europe after 9 or 10 years of captivity. Many women and children disappeared forever into the harems of Mamluk emirs, owing to the plentiful supply of, and by the way, again, women and children disappeared forever into the harems of Mamluk emirs. So, yeah. Owing to the plentiful supply, the price of a girl dropped to a drachma, a piece in the slave market at Damascus. But the number of Christians that were slain was still greater. As soon as Acre was in his power, the Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil set about his systematic destruction. The houses and bazaars were pillaged, then burned. The building of the orders and the fortified towers and castles were dismantled. The city walls were left to disintegrate. When the German pilgrim Ludolf of Suchem passed by some 40 years later, only a few peasants lived amongst the ruins of the once splendid capital. Let's see. Accordingly, despite the precept to dwell in the Holy Land, Isaac, born Samuel, fled to Italy and thence to Christian Spain, where he wrote, "The word ziz in Arabic is derogatory, for when they wish to say in that tongue, strike him upon the head, give him a blow upon the neck, they say, Zazu, hit him. Indeed, on account of our sins, they strike upon the head of the children of Israel who dwell in their lands, and they thus extort money from them by force. For they say in their tongue, Mal al Yahudi Mubah. It is lawful to take money from the Jews. For in the eyes of the Muslims, the children of Israel are open to abuse and unprotected as an unprotected field. Even in their law and statutes, they rule that the testimony of a Muslim is always to be believed against that of a Jew." So, by the way, remember the whole testimony thing? Yeah, it's not just women. Right? For this reason, our rabbis of blessed memory have said, rather beneath the yoke of Edom, Christendom, than of Ishmael. So, by the way, Edom is not a favorable term, by the way, right? But again, it's like, again, Edom is better than Ishmael, right? So, again, they pleaded for mercy before the Holy One, blessed be he, saying, Master of the world, either let us live beneath thy shadow, or else beneath the children of Edom. A Talmudic verse. So, again, there was a lot of people who got caught up in all this stupid identitarian politics. But yeah, because identitarianism is older than, like, people think it is. Conclusion. It is ahistorical and frankly absurd to separate the Crusades from the anti-Christian Jihad wars that antedated and precipitated them. 4.5 centuries of devastating jihad conquests, so that's i.e. 632 to 1095 CE, and the cruel imposition of dimitude on the vanquished primarily Christian populations finally engendered and sustained, organized in violent response when Christendom perceived its very survival to be imperiled. Jacques Ellul has characterized the origins and effect of this transformation. The crusade is an imitation of the jihad. Thus, the crusade includes a guaranteed salvation. The one who dies in holy war, i.e. jihad, goes straight to paradise, and the same applies to the one who takes part in a crusade. This is no coincidence. It is an exact equivalent. The crusades, which were once admired as an expression of absolute faith and which are now the subject of accusations against the church and Christianity, are of Muslim, not Christian origin. The nonviolence of Jesus Christ changes into a war and conflict with that waged by the foe. Like that war, this is now a holy war. The devastating Islamic institution of jihad must be acknowledged, renounced, dismantled, and relegated forever to the dustbin of history by Muslims themselves. It's not going to happen. You're going to have to do that to Islam. As Professor Walid Pades said in a frank, austere commentary entitled Jihad is Jihad noted, in the Christian world, modern Christians outlawed crusading. They did not rewrite history to legitimize themselves. Those who believe that the jihad holy war is a sin today must have the courage to delegitimize it and outlaw it as well. So, which, by the way, they won't. They won't, because all the people who say jihad is a sin, they don't actually believe it. Right? All those people in the Ummah who say jihad is a sin, they don't actually believe it. Right? They say that because they understand you will believe it for some reason, And because, again, all it takes is one person to lie to a lot of people's faces to get them to believe the lie, it works, right? So, and they're not exactly wrong. The Crusade was an idea picked up from Islam, but it was picked up from Islam as a kind of meet them where they are kind of deal, right? Where it's like, look, it's like, what's that thing Asmongold said? When they go low, you go low. It's literally that idea, right? It's like, you know what? If it be war, if it be decided by war, then we might as well fight and win kind of deal, right? Sadly, peace only comes when they fear losing. Yes. Makes me sick to think that the anti-society nature extremists like Goatis likely approves of this. He's the definition of dark anti-woke, if you ever look him up. I'm going to have to look this guy up. But yeah, I've been wanting to read this for a while. I just knew I had to do it on a weekend, and I'm so irritated that OBS was being non-cooperative with me for such a while, because I wanted to start reading this at like 4 o'clock. Oh my god. So yeah, let me know what y'all think about this in the comment section, because again, I haven't read this in ages, so this was definitely a refresher for me. But you know, I've also said, you know, my ancestors are Spanish, right? So you got to see a little bit about what my ancestors had to go through, right? And why I'm like just disgusted with the Spanish government allowing, again, what's going on with Morocco and you know, Ceuta to happen, because you know, there was a time when they were being ruled over and, you know, called Al-Andalus, and I wonder how many of those people who are from Morocco, instead of calling it Spain or whatever the fucking like Arabicized equivalent would be, call it Al-Andalus, right? Because again, they don't really believe that a land that apostatizes actually has any kind of legitimacy. It's still technically, it's still to them Muslim land. It just needs to be reconquered, right? So yeah, again, my opinion on that entire situation is basically what was said about the Constitution by Lysander Spooner, right? Either your monarchy and your government has been powerless to stop this, or it has, you know, actively caused it. In either case, it is unfit to exist. And the Spanish are going to have to think really fucking long and hard. They're going to have to think really hard about whether or not it is time to boog. Because I can't say it, but I think they might have to think really hard about whether or not it's time to boog and what the consequences of that actually are. So that'll be it for this episode. I will see y'all on the next time. If you like it, drop a like, and if you leave a comment, let me know what you thought.